Accursed Space, Mage Saga Book 5, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 21. Lomang and Mezban sat side by side in the Bathsheba's gym hall, their quarrels apparently forgotten or put aside. Somehow Lomang had managed to find his ridiculous blue hat and had it perched on his head. 10 or 12 of Mezban's troops stood behind them. Carina peered at the men and women at the rear of the hall, sensing something not quite right about them. Papu had set her down as he'd entered the room. He pushed her and she stumbled forward, ending up on her hands and knees, her muscles still weak. She raised her head. Mezban's look was imperious, but Lomang's was inscrutable. He nodded at a woman standing at the edge of the gym. She walked over to Carina, carrying a cloth over her outstretched arms. The woman bent down, offering her the textile. After a brief moment of confusion, she took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. The piece of material was sufficiently large to cover her to her knees. With some difficulty, she stood. "Where are my brothers and sisters? Where is my friend, Bryce? What have you done with them?"
"Our positions are exchanged now," said Lomang. "It is myself and the magnificent Mezban Noran, Procurator of the Majestic Isles, member of the Encircling Council, who will ask the questions, and you will answer."
"I'm not telling you anything until I know the people I love are safe." She heard a heavy footfall from behind. Then Papu's hand clasped her head, his fingers reaching around to squeeze her cheeks, pressing painfully into the bruise forming where he'd hit her.
"I think I can crush her skull with one hand, brother. Would you like me to try?"
His grip tightened. "You aren't going to kill me," said Carina. "So don't bother threatening. You need me." Mezban leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "We may not want you dead, but that won't stop us from hurting you." "Oh, quit the dramatics!" She blinked. The reason why Mezban's soldiers looked odd had hit her. She twisted her neck, wrenching her head out of Papu's hand. "What's going on here?" She looked behind her and through the exits. Only the giant stood to her rear, and the doorways were empty and dark. She tightened the cloth over her shoulders and took a step forward. "Remain still!" yelled Mezban. Papu laid his heavy hands on her again. "Let me go!" She felt like screaming in frustration. "Tell me who's really in charge here. I'll speak to them, not you."
"Bring her closer,"
said Lomang. Papu pushed her over to him. "Tell me who's giving you orders. Is it the Shurras, or did Ki catch up to us?" "No one is giving us orders," said Mezban. "You are under our command now. You will do as we say." Lomang touched his wife's arm, as if to caution her or remind her of something.
"What makes you think we are under another's direction?"
"Your soldiers aren't armed, and someone killed Cadwallader with a blow to his head, not a pulse round. If you're the ones in control around here, where are your troops' weapons?" "Why would I arm my troops if we have control of the ship?" Mezban countered. "Because you have more than 100 trained and experienced mercs you just took out of stasis. Only a moron wouldn't arm their guards. And I don't think you're that stupid." Fury flared in Mezban's features, and she spluttered with rage.
"Calm yourself, my love,"
Lomang said.
"Her words are the twitterings of a bird in a cage."
He continued in his own language, no doubt imagining Carina couldn't understand him.
"And yet, she does have a point."
"What point is that?" replied Mezban viciously in the same tongue.
"Her correct assumption that we are not the true masters of this vessel. will impact her willingness to work with us. Without her cooperation,
He said a word Carina didn't recognize.
May see fit to see us as a delicacy rather than as slaves.
I don't like the bitch, Mezban muttered. We should have killed her and kept the children. They're enough of a bargaining tool.
My dear, the children are too scared. Their fear robs them of their ability. This one may be our salvation.
As the conversation had gone on, Mezban had been steadily glaring at Carina. Suddenly, her look sharpened and a new understanding lit her face. I think she comprehends us. Carina tried to maintain a blank expression, but she didn't appear to convince the woman of her ignorance. Mezban drew away from Lomang and jabbed a finger at her. Do you speak our language? She asked in universal speech. There was no point in dissembling. Now Mezban suspected she understood, she would never be careless in speaking around her again. I understand a little, said Carina. Enough to know I'm a bitch. Mezban scowled. Lomang rested his elbows on his knees as he leaned forward to speak. She was shocked to see his paunch hang down between his spread thighs. The last time she'd seen the smuggler, he had thinned all the way down to normal weight. How long had he been out of stasis? Certainly long enough to put on some fat. How long have I been in deep sleep?
Perhaps there is a little truth to your guess. What if I were to tell you that there are other masters, even more powerful than Mezban and myself, who would be interested in what you and your siblings can do, and that the knowledge of this power could mean the difference between life and death for all of us? I would say I see no reason why my ability should save you. I told you not to talk to her, Mezban blurted. You fool! Idiot! She struck her husband with the side of her fist. Please, my darling, have patience. There are many roads we may travel yet, and none can foresee all ends.
I see an end for you, yelled Mezban. And if they won't do it, I will. She jumped out of her seat and strode away, her little legs and arms swinging. Lomang sighed, but his gaze followed her adoringly. The small woman neared a doorway, but then abruptly halted. All anger and indignation appeared to ooze out of her, and she took a step back, her arms dangling at her sides, her jaw hanging loose. Lomang slowly rose to his feet.
Mezban, my love, come here.
His tone was soft and fearful, but his wife seemed frozen. She only stared at something beyond the door. Though Carina couldn't see the object of her fear, the feeling was infectious. She shivered under the cloth she was clutching tightly to her chest. The gazes of the soldiers at the end of the gym were fixed on the black opening. A squeak escaped Mezban's lips, and she dropped to her knees. A long, slim, dark grey limb clad in exoskeleton entered the room. Horror clasped Carina's throat. The limb was followed by another, and then a third. A searing silence permeated the atmosphere. The only sound was the click of the creature's limbs on the tiled floor. She had heard tales of these aliens when she was a child. Terrible tales of abhorrent acts, of children murdered, of people being eaten alive, of entire towns depopulated. The stories had been so awful, she'd begun to suspect the beings were made up, that nothing could be so evil. But then, when she was 9 years old, they had attacked the small, impoverished settlement where she lived. She had seen the dreadful things with her own eyes and witnessed the truth of their rumoured ability to time shift. She had seen they were real. Commander Key had not caught up to the Bathsheba, set on revenging the death of Sable Dirksen, and nor had some traitor among the black dogs wakened Lomang and Mezban from their deep sleep. Their release was due to another event entirely, the arrival of an enemy of all humankind. The ship had been taken over by Regions. Chapter 22. Carina! Darius leapt up and ran toward her. I can't hug you, she said, looking down at the cloth she was gripping to her chest. This is all I'm wearing. But I can hug you. She bent down and he wrapped his arms around her neck, tugging her lower. 2 of Mezban's unarmed guards and Papu had brought her to the suite of rooms, pushed her through the door and then closed and locked it. To her immense relief, all her siblings were inside, and they showed no signs of any injuries. Fern and Oriana were lying on the floor, and Parthenia was standing behind Nala, a hairbrush in her hand. When Carina caught her oldest sister's eye, she looked away quickly and continued to brush Nala's hair. "I'm so glad you're okay," Oriana exclaimed. Fern echoed the sentiment, and both the twins also came over to welcome her with a hug. But when Nala did the same, Parthenia remained where she was. "I'll find you some clothes," she said stiffly, and then walked into a bedroom. "We were hoping Mezban would take you out of stasis," said Fern. "We were worried about you," Oriana said. "She was saying she was going to leave everyone else in the capsules until we reach our destination, wherever that is." Suddenly, Carina's last few drops of energy were expended, and she tottered, unable to stand any longer. "Whoa," said Fern, as she collapsed in his direction. He caught her, and with help from Oriana, supported her as far as the sofa. She fell into the seat and lay against the cushions. Parthenia returned from the bedroom, carrying a pair of pants and a shirt. "Wait a minute," Oriana said. "I know something better." She ran into another room and came out again with a coverlet and a pillow. "Remember how weak we were when we woke up?" she asked the others as she placed the covering over Carina. "Just rest for a bit. You'll feel better in a few days." She put the pillow at the end of the sofa. "Lie down if you want to." "Thanks." Carina's happiness at seeing that her brothers and sisters were okay momentarily overcame her fears about their perilous situation. Then she recalled something she wanted to ask them. "When you all went into stasis, did it seem like you remained awake too long?" "Yes," Fern replied. "It was really scary. I thought I was going to die, but then I must have gone unconscious. We talked about it when we were woken up, right?" he said to the others. "Yeah, it was horrible," said Oriana. "The same thing happened to me," Carina said. "I think it's something to do with our genetics. I had a similar experience before, though at the time it was to my advantage. I'm glad you're all okay in the end. The stasis capsules automatically evacuate if the subject begins to suffer a medical emergency," said Parthenia. "I don't think we were in any danger." "I'm sure you're right." Carina smiled at her sister, but Parthenia returned her gaze stonily. "You'll have to fill me in on everything that's happened. I only woke up about an hour ago. But before we go into that, where's Bryce? Have any of you seen him?" "No," Parthenia answered gravely. "We don't know where he is." Concern over Bryce reminded Carina of another man, someone none of them would ever see again. "I have some bad news." Because there was no easier, gentler way of saying it, she spoke simply, choking out, "Lieutenant Colonel Cadwallader is dead." "Oh no!" Oriana clasped her cheeks, her eyes filling with tears. "Lomang gave the order for him to be executed. I heard it as I was coming out of deep sleep." She decided not to mention she'd seen his dead body, especially not in front of Nala. "He was a nice man," Nala said sadly. Carina nodded. She doubted any of his soldiers would have described Cadwallader as nice, but he'd always been kind to the children, and though he'd been a tough, strict commander, no one could have accused him of being unfair. She recalled the party in the Twilight Dome, when he'd tried to give her advice about her relationship with Bryce. She bit her lip as she recalled how she'd rebuffed him. He'd only been trying to help, and he'd been right when he'd said something like that was worth holding on to. Maybe she'd been too hasty in pushing Bryce and her family away. Maybe this time she could help them without screwing up. She beckoned Nala closer. As she grasped the little girl's hand in her own, she said, "How have you been feeling, sweetie? Do you still have nightmares?" "Sometimes." Nala's gaze turned downward. "Not so much anymore," Parthenia said. "I think she's getting better." Carina wasn't sure her youngest sister would ever get over being trapped with Stevenson's body in the pilot's cabin. She felt bad she hadn't been around to help her during those 8 months they'd waited to go into stasis. Perhaps sensing her feelings, Darius said brightly, "Nala's my best friend. Look at the pictures we drew together. Do you like them?" He was pointing at a wall, and Carina noticed for the first time that several pieces of paper had been stuck to it, each a hand-drawn image. She saw stick figures, starships, castles, and eggs with people inside, which she assumed to be depictions of the time the children had spent in stasis. "I love them. Did you draw them all by yourselves?" Darius and Nala nodded proudly. Then she saw a picture that was not so pleasant. A black, many-legged creature loomed over a group of stick figures of different sizes. So the kids had met the Regions. She shuddered at the thought. They must have been utterly terrified. "Nala's a chatterbox now," Fern said. The little girl pouted, so he added, "In a nice way." "Yes, we love hearing Nala talk," said Oriana. "She tells stories." "Amazing stories," Darius said expansively. "Well," said Carina, "there's a particular story I need to hear. What's been happening while I was in deep sleep? How long have you all been out of stasis, and what's happened to you?" From what Lomang and Mezban had implied, it appeared they'd attempted to impress the Regions with her siblings' mage powers, but the children had been too upset to cast, understandably. "I think that's a story I should tell you," Parthenia said solemnly, "and perhaps out of the hearing of little ears." Said Fern. "I think that's a hint we need to take Darius and Nala to play a game in our bedroom." "I do believe you're right, brother," Oriana quipped. The twins' cheerfulness despite the circumstances warmed Carina's heart, but Parthenia's expression soon cooled it again. After a little protesting, Darius and Nala followed their brother and sister into a bedroom. Parthenia watched until the door closed. Then she turned to Carina. "We were brought out of deep sleep 3.5 weeks ago. After giving us a day to recover, Lomang told us to make elixir. Then he took us one by one to some horrible creatures," her face twisted with disgust, "and instructed us to cast. He took me first, and I pretended to be too afraid to do it. I told the others to do the same. I don't think Darius even had to fake it. Those aliens are terrifying, and of course Nala can't cast anyway. Lomang didn't believe me when I told him, but he seems to think she is also too scared." "You were pretending you couldn't cast." Carina was impressed. Her sister's tactic had been smart. The idea that the Regions were so horrifying the children couldn't perform their ability was entirely believable. If she had been in her sister's place, she would have defied Lomang and refused to cast, no doubt bringing down a world of trouble on her head. That was a great idea. Thanks, but I don't need your praise, Parthenia replied acidly. Carina inwardly winced. Anyway, said Parthenia, since then he's tried the same thing several times, but our weeping and wailing must be pretty convincing, because now he's woken you up. He probably thinks you're tougher than us. Maybe. He and Mezban wanted to question me about something too, but our conversation didn't get that far in the end. Has Lomang said anything about what's going on? Or have you overheard anything? Nothing. He always speaks his own language when he isn't talking directly to us, and we spend most of our time in here anyway. The soldiers bring us food twice a day. I've been trying to keep everyone occupied so they don't worry too much. Carina hesitated. She didn't want to upset her already prickly sister. I really don't mean this in a patronizing way, but you've done a great job. Ma would be proud. Parthenia didn't reply, but neither did she look angry. I'll tell you what I know, okay? Carina went on. Then we can decide together what to do next. Okay, Parthenia replied, uncertainly. I've encountered Regions once before, when I was a little girl. They prey on humans, attacking small remote settlements on insignificant planets and capturing as many of the inhabitants as they can find. No one they captured has ever escaped, so nobody knows exactly what happens to the people taken. As I understand it, it's been going on for centuries. The stories had passed into folklore where I grew up, and I never quite believed them until they came to my town. Parthenia's mouth gaped in horror. Couldn't the local army fight them off? There was no army where I lived. I guess the Regions deliberately target places where they'll meet little resistance. But even if we'd had weapons and trained soldiers, they're difficult to defeat. They have a special capability. They can move forward and backward in time, just by a second or so. It makes them hard to kill. You could have the perfect shot, but by the time your round reached them, the creature wouldn't exist in that moment anymore. When it did return to the exact present, the round would have passed through the space it was occupying. Does that make sense? I think so. The good news for us is their ability doesn't make them immune from a cast. Do you know why? Parthenia's eyes grew thoughtful. Then her features brightened. Because casts work slower than pulses. You got it. The lag, the thing that's usually a disadvantage to us, is actually an advantage when it comes to killing Regions. Their time shift isn't sufficient to avoid the slower effect of a cast. Her sister's nose wrinkled. Do we have to kill them? Carina put a hand on her shoulder. I know it isn't going to be easy, but it's them or us. Chapter 23. Mezban's troops came for Carina in the middle of the quiet shift on the second day, when she was sound asleep. Though the guards were weaponless, their numbers and strength made resisting them foolish, and she didn't want to upset her siblings by putting up a fight. Instead, she went quietly, rising from the sofa she was using as a bed and allowing the 5 soldiers to lead her away. She felt terrible, even worse than she had during the first hours she'd come out of stasis. She'd regained some strength in her legs, but an exhaustion had settled on her that sleep didn't erase. Her muscles ached no matter what position she lay in, and just the thought of eating made her gag. Only Parthenia woke up as she was leaving. Her sister watched from her open bedroom door as Carina left, raising her hand in silent farewell. It was clear what lay in store. Lomang and Mezban were going to try to make her cast in front of the Regions. From what she'd understood, it appeared that this was intended to impress the creatures and prevent them from slaughtering all the humans. From Carina's perspective, the smuggler and his wife were indulging in wishful thinking. Even if she'd been inclined to protect them from the aliens, which she surely was not, the creatures were not dumb. Why would they place any value on humans who couldn't cast? It would make more sense to set aside the ones who could and then kill the rest. The thought of the wholesale murder of everyone aboard made her shudder. She might be able to trick the Regions into believing that Nala could cast, and so she should be allowed to live. But what about Bryce, Atoy, and the rest of the mercs? And the soldiers under Mezban had only been following orders. She had no personal gripe against them. Another thought struck. Where was Jace? She hadn't seen him for months prior to going into stasis. She had been angry with him for siding with Cadwallader about forming a council. The children hadn't mentioned him either. Did Lomang and Mezban even know he was a mage? He had helped in the defense of the Duchess's airlock, but Mezban had been in the Twilight Dome at the time, and her troops had quickly been put into deep sleep. Information about Jace might not have gotten through to her. Carina recalled a second person she hadn't had anything to do with for a while. Calverley. Had the old man been taken out of stasis? And if he had, where were they keeping him? Mezban's guards returned her to the Bathsheba's gym. When she entered the room for the second time, the lights were half their usual brightness. The place was also cooler than it had been. The soldiers had insisted she went with them immediately and didn't give her time to change out of her thin pajamas. She was also barefoot, as the closets in the suite held no shoes. As soon as she stepped over the threshold, cold air hit her, and she began to shiver. 4 Regions crouched at the far end of the gym, their black spindly forms ill-defined in the shadows. Even if she hadn't seen one of the creatures yesterday, she didn't need a closer look at the 4 in the gym to know their exact appearance. It had been etched on her mind for the last 10 years. They were roughly as tall as a male human, but 2/3 of their height was in their 3 pairs of legs. Their upper third was as long as a man was tall and narrow, like an upturned canoe, with a ridge like a keel running from the front to the back. Several shiny black eyes were centered on the thickened front end of the ridge, and 2 pairs of sharp mouth parts overlapped beneath the eyes. She had always had an interest in bugs from as far back as she could remember, and she liked them all, except these ones. At the mere sight of the Regions, her pulse sped up. Images from the attack on her settlement when she was a child flashed unbidden into her mind. One of the creatures trying to separate a father from his baby son, then changing its mind and lifting both onto the dark carapace of its back. Saul, one of her several bullies, ripped from her grasp by black pincers. Nai, looking up in terror when a Region discovered her hiding place. She swallowed and walked forward. Along with the rest of the population where she'd grown up, she'd never known exactly what the creatures did with the victims they captured during their raids, except that the men, women and children never came back. She didn't want to find out either, but it was looking inevitable. Mezban stood with her husband near the door where Carina had entered. They were the only other humans in the room. The soldiers had silently withdrawn. Lomang beckoned her over. The man's demeanour had changed since she'd last seen him. It was clear his and Mezban's previous haughty attitude had been a show. Now the man's eyes were wide with fear, and his skin glistened with sweat. "I know what you're going to say," she said. before he had a chance to speak. She could see he was holding a flask, no doubt full of elixir brewed by one of the children. You want me to impress our captors with a performance and save your miserable hides. It would be in your interest to do what we ask, Mezban said. We know more about these creatures than you do. Our people have suffered their raids for thousands of years. We have information that could make your family's experience in captivity more endurable. Carina held out her hand for the elixir. As Lomang handed it over, she said to Mezban, "You would say that, wouldn't you? Why should I believe you? And even if you are speaking the truth, you're assuming the Regians are new to me. They aren't. My home planet borders the galactic desert we crossed to get to your sector, and my settlement was raided once." She didn't mention that, as a child, she'd single-handedly driven the raiders away. She didn't want Lomang or Mezban to know any more than she'd just told them. Mezban frowned. "And why should we believe you? I don't give a shit whether you believe me. On the other hand, you'd better hope you have something genuine to offer." At the corner of the hall, the 4 Regians stirred, shifting their monstrous spindly legs, their pincers scraping on the hard floor. Lomang's eyes grew wider.
"They grow impatient. Do something, quickly."
She guessed the pair were down to their final chance with the evil aliens. If she failed to cast, would Lomang and Mezban become lunch? She smiled, enjoying their torment. Now she had elixir she could transport out of here if the Regians attacked. There was a lot she could do with elixir in her hand. But to get everyone else who deserved saving out of here, not including the 2 who stood before her, would require planning and time.
"Why are you smiling?"
Lomang demanded.
"Don't you have any idea what those creatures can do?"
"To be honest, I don't have a clear picture, but I'd be interested to find out."
"Please," he begged. "You must do something."
To Mezban's credit, she didn't debase herself as her husband did. She only stiffened, and her gaze flicked repeatedly to the 4 creatures in the corner. "You know," said Carina bitterly, "I might have been more inclined to help you if you hadn't murdered Cadwallader. That really was unforgivable." "What did you expect us to do?" Mezban spat. "He was your leader. If he'd lived, his soldiers would have rallied to him. He would have been a constant thorn in our side. And you think I won't? That is, assuming you survive the next 5 minutes."
"Stars, if I could bring him back I would," said Lomang. "I didn't know he meant so much to you. As my wife says, it was a logical, strategic decision. You would have done the same yourself. You have done the same."
He was referring to the execution of Sable Dirksen, but that hadn't been strategic. It had been a spur-of-the-moment act, born of rage and a desire for revenge. "And yet," said Carina scathingly, "I didn't kill you or you." She pointed at the man and woman in turn. Her statement was beyond denying. Lomang's lips folded over his large teeth like a trap. The movements of the Regians became more agitated. A noise between a hiss and a rattle sounded from them. She estimated the smuggler and Mezban's time was nearly up. "You have one chance to save yourselves. There were others you took out of stasis who were especially important to me. If they live, I'll do a little performance. Then we'll talk about what happens going forward. If you killed any of these 3 people, you'll follow them, courtesy of our friends over there. You can lie, of course, but that'll only delay your deaths for as long as it takes me to find out."
"We didn't kill anyone else,"
Lomang spluttered.
"Only your commander. That's right, isn't it, Mezban, my love?"
She held Carina's gaze with her own, from under hooded lids. "My husband speaks the truth. Only the blue-eyed man died." Carina turned her attention to Lomang.
"Actually, that isn't quite correct,"
he said under her stare.
"What?"
Mezban also glared at him.
"My love,"
he said nervously.
"some of the mercenaries died when the ship was taken by the Regions. Do you remember? We found their bodies and put them in the airlock."
"Ah, yes." Mezban's gaze returned to Carina. "But we did not kill them. And if you're worried about the old man, he remains in stasis. The Regions told us they don't want his aged body." "Calverley, if that is his name," Mezban replied disdainfully. "I never inquired." Carina decided to take their words for now. One of the aliens lifted itself up and began to walk toward them. The hissing rattle grew louder. It was clearly this one that was talking. "One more thing," said Carina.
"Yes,"
squeaked Lomang.
"What? Anything."
"My siblings and I are to be released from captivity immediately. We are to have the freedom of the ship." From the corner of her eye, Carina saw Mezban give a small smirk, which the woman hastily shut down when Carina turned to look at her.
"Yes, we agree,"
Lomang exclaimed. The Region was halfway across the gym. Its mouth parts were opening and closing, perhaps because it was speaking, or perhaps because it was anticipating a tasty meal. She opened the flask. It contained only one mouthful of elixir, not enough to do anything major. She would have dearly loved to space Lomang and Mezban, but she had to be cautious. She swigged the elixir, then closed her eyes and swiftly cast. When she opened her eyes, Lomang was already moving through the air. She had contemplated sending him in the direction of the approaching Region, but if he opened his bowels in fear, that could be messy. Instead, she sent him in the opposite direction. When he neared the gym wall, she dropped him, heavily enough to make a satisfying thump, but not break his bones. The Region paused, its pincers clicking on the floor, as if in thought. Over the next few minutes, the reason for Mezban's ill-concealed smirk became clear. After dumping Lomang on the other side of the gym, Carina noticed a slim rectangular bump on Mezban's chest, under her clothing. She'd thought Mezban and Lomang understood the Region's language, but when she saw the bump, she suspected this wasn't the case. She stepped up to Mezban and reached into the neck of her shirt. "Hey!" the woman protested, trying to fight her off. But Carina was too fast. She felt for a string, located it, and yanked it. A translator emerged. Carina pulled it over her head and at the same time thrust an open hand toward the woman. "Give me your comm." Mezban popped the small device out of her ear and handed it over, sending Carina a black look along with it. Wrinkling her nose, she wiped the comm on her pajama pants before inserting it into her own ear. Immediately, she heard a long string of words in universal speech, even though she could hear nothing inside the room. The Regions were talking, but she guessed the pitch of their voices was mostly outside the normal human hearing range. The noises she'd heard them making before had only been a small part of what they were saying. However, the translator she now held in her hand wasn't effective at translating the creature's language. She frowned, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The Regions seemed to be arguing. She heard humans and no a lot, as well as better way and prefer. She also heard soon, decide now, and no, later. The aliens constantly talked over each other. They understood what was being said, no doubt, but from a human perspective, the conversation was one big jumble. Also, the translator didn't convey any differences in the individual voices. They all sounded exactly alike, so it was impossible to focus on any one of them. She closed her eyes in an effort to comprehend the gist at least. She heard "arrive soon" a bunch of times and "no time left." Her heart sank as she realized what she was probably hearing and why Mezban had smirked at her demand for the freedom of the ship. The Bathsheba had nearly arrived at her destination. The amount of time Carina and her siblings had to enjoy that freedom was limited. They could be down to a mere few hours for moving around the vessel, communicating with their friends and allies, and devising a plan to defeat the Regions. She opened her eyes and asked Mezban, "How long do we have before we reach their planet?" "We aren't sure exactly." She grew angry. First the smirk, and now Mezban was apparently being deliberately vague. The woman was as much of an idiot as her husband. If they were to survive, they needed her. They should be helping her, not making everything more difficult. Her anger must have shown, because Mezban held up her hands. "Honestly, we don't know, but it isn't long." "So that's why they told you to get everyone out of stasis. They wanted us already to disembark. And what's going to happen when we arrive?" Lomang had gotten up and was walking toward them, limping and grimacing. Mezban's expression was gloomy. "That's what you were helping us with. We have very little information on what happens to people captured by Regions, and what we do have has come from second-hand sources. It is said that they prize human meat as food, but they also use us as slaves on their farms. We were hoping that your skills would be useful for the latter function, and we wanted to find out all that mages can do so we would have some roles to suggest to our captors." "Human slaves for agriculture? Why would they need us for that? Machinery is way more efficient." Mezban shrugged. "Who knows, but I would say it's preferable to being eaten."
"Most things are," said Lomang.
Carina came to a decision. "I'm leaving," she said. Glancing at the Regions, who still seemed to be arguing about what to do, she added, "Providing these creatures let me." "I doubt they'll try to stop you," said Mezban. "Everywhere except the residential areas is sealed off. They've allowed us free run of those areas, knowing we can't escape. I want to know one more thing. How long was I in stasis? Wait, 2 things. Has the Bathsheba been diverted far from her original course?" Lomang answered,
"All we know is the Regions deactivated our stasis capsules 6 weeks ago. Your deep sleep chamber was sealed off, but then they told us to wake you all in stages."
"It was then we realized our chance," said Mezban. "We thought our mages can deliver us, but your siblings were not capable of demonstrating their talents to our captors. You, on the other hand, have the opportunity to save us. You must take it. You must." Indignation and fury blazed in Carina. She stepped up to the woman and glared down into her little smug face. "You had the opportunity to save one man's life. Not even that. You had the chance to simply allow him to live, but you didn't take it. Why the hell should I save you?" Lomang spluttered,
"But you said—"
Carina was already leaving. Chapter 24. Parthenia paced the floor of the living room, rigid with outrage. How could they have been so stupid? I know, said Carina, rubbing a spot between her eyebrows. She was half sitting, half lying on the sofa. Her eyes were sunken in shadows, and her skin was pale and tight. She was experiencing the effects of her time in stasis. Parthenia had been similarly affected, and so had their siblings. Carina would recover in a few days, but from what Mezban had said, they didn't have that long. They had only hours to act, and it was all due to Lomang and Mezban's idiocy. "If they had given us our freedom," Parthenia went on, "if they had taken you out of stasis earlier, we would have figured out a way to take back control of the ship by now. We would have spaced the Regions and continued to Earth." Carina groaned and sat up, resting her elbows on her knees and letting her head flop down. "But instead they wanted to retain control over us. They chose to use us to try to impress the Regions when we could have entirely defeated them. Only that would have left Lomang and Mezban beholden to us. They had to be in charge, even as we're all being transported to our deaths. Or to be used as slave labour on farms," Carina reminded her. "Yes." Parthenia paused, then said, "That part doesn't make any sense." "Right, it doesn't. But that's the least of our worries. I think I'm going to be sick." Carina got up and ran to the bathroom. Parthenia sat down and tried to ignore the sound of her sister vomiting, or rather retching. As far as she knew, Carina hadn't eaten a thing since coming out of deep sleep. It was clear her sister needed her help, and from what she'd said about them working together, it sounded like this time she might actually accept it. The thought brought a small spark of joy, despite the dangers they faced. But she didn't really believe her sister would ever give up trying to control her or their brothers and sisters. That was a problem for later, however. What should they do first? One step was obvious. They had to make more elixir. But then what? Carina emerged from the bathroom, wiping her mouth. She flopped down onto the sofa, asking, "I look as bad as I feel, don't I?" "You've looked better." Suddenly Parthenia knew she'd never stopped loving her sister, in spite of everything that had happened, yet somehow she liked her better when she was weak and vulnerable. "I can barely think," Carina said. "We should do something, now, but I'm not sure what. Maybe we should focus on finding Jace. The Regions know I can cast, and they know you all can too. That's what Lomang told them, even though they didn't see a demonstration. So they'll be wary of all of us. They're probably already figuring out the possibilities of what we can do. But I don't think they know about Jace." A door to one of the bedrooms opened, and a tousle-haired Fern poked his head out. "You two are up early?" "You don't know the half of it," Parthenia replied. "Wake up Oriana. I want both of you to make more elixir, fast." "But we're allowed out of the suite," she interrupted. "Hurry up." He darted across the living room to another door. "Nala will get woken up too," said Parthenia, "but that can't be helped." "She needs to be awake and alert," Carina said. "She also has to stick close by us while we do whatever it is we're going to do. The Regions believe she's a mage, and they might hurt her if she doesn't cast for them." "I'll tell her when she's up. I was thinking, if we're fast and we all cast together, we could simply transport all the Regions outside the ship. Then the Bathsheba's ours. It isn't going to be that easy. We don't know how many there are or where they're situated. Mezban said all the operational areas of the ship are sealed off. I'm guessing that's where most of the Regions are right now, and they came here in their own ship, don't forget. That must be following alongside us or joined to our ship, like the Duchess and the Peregrine, and it'll be carrying a crew." She shook her head. "There's going to be a battle, no doubt about it. I hope the Black Dog's weapons haven't been destroyed. We need to find them." Fern emerged from the bedroom, followed by Oriana, sleepy-eyed. "Can we really go outside now?" she asked. "Yes," Parthenia replied, "but be careful. I don't think Lomang and Mezban are going to give up control easily," said Carina. "They might try something, perhaps try to force you to cast for them or use you as hostages. It would be stupid of them, of course, but they've shown a special talent for that." "Don't worry," said Fern airily. "It won't take us long to make more elixir. As soon as we have it, if Lomang comes near us, I'll threaten to cast fire into his hat." Oriana chuckled. "This isn't the time for joking," Parthenia said sternly. As they'd been talking, Fern and Oriana had crossed the living room to the main door. Fern opened it and peered outside. "The guards have gone." They went out, but before Fern left, he looked back at Parthenia and Carina. "I'm glad you've kissed and made up. Everything's so much nicer when you act maturely." The door closed. Carina raised her eyebrows. "Did he mean me?" "I think he meant both of us." Half an hour later, the mages, armed with still hot elixir, were roaming the Bathsheba, searching for the black dogs. They walked the empty, silent corridors as a group. Carina hadn't wanted to split up for the search, and Parthenia had agreed with her. Despite the greater efficiency, the younger children could be taken hostage, especially Nala, who had no way of defending herself. They were at the highest level, where many suites were situated, but they found them all unlocked and unoccupied. They turned a corner and were suddenly confronted by a solid metal wall blocking the route entirely. The Regians had sealed it off. "What's through there?" Oriana asked. "The Twilight Dome," replied Carina. "Why don't the Regians want us to go to that?" "No idea. We'll have to go back the way we came. Try another direction." The elevators weren't working, so they found an access shaft and climbed down it to the next deck. Here things were busier. They passed several of Mezban's troops, but without incident. The soldiers had clearly been told to leave them alone, but they still couldn't find the mercs. "We should just ask one of them," said Parthenia. "Or I'll enthrall someone," Oriana offered. "Yes." Carina about-faced and ran back to the last person they'd passed, an older man who looked as though his years in the military had been long and hard. "Where are the black dogs?" she demanded. "Where are you keeping them?" Her hand moved toward the canister of elixir on her hip. The man's features signalled his alarm. "There's no need for that, miss. The mercs are being held in the refectory, just along there a ways." He pointed in the direction they'd already been heading. She turned and ran back to her siblings, but she didn't stop. She sped right past them, calling out, "Come on! We don't know how much time we have." Outside the refectory, a group of 10 or more of Mezban's men and women stood, but they were unarmed. "Move aside," she ordered. The troops parted silently, watching the mages. Parthenia stepped through them and tried the door. "It's locked." Lacking armed troops, Lomang and Mezban had put the mercs in the refectory while they were still groggy from stasis and unable to put up much of a fight, and then simply sealed them in. They would have access to food and restrooms in there, though little else. Carina was already casting unlock. A moment later, she opened the door wide, and the smell of unwashed bodies floated out. "Phooey!" exclaimed Oriana, wafting the space in front of her nose. "It's Lin and the kids!" Whoops and hollers followed. Carina went inside, and Parthenia peeked in. Immediately she covered her mouth and chuckled. Mezban's guards hadn't given the mercs anything to wear after taking them from their deep sleep capsules, and the men and women had improvised by creating underwear from table napkins. They resembled large, muscly babies, naked except for their diapers. Several of the black dogs had descended on Carina and were alternately slapping her back and lifting her off the floor in bear hugs. Over the sound of cheers and yells of general jubilation, Parthenia could faintly hear her sister protesting and telling them to be quiet. Then, through the hubbub, she heard someone call her name. She turned. Camille. Tears suddenly welling up from nowhere, she ran to him and threw her arms around him.
"Hey, you probably don't want to do that,"
he said half-heartedly.
"I must stink."
"I don't care." She hugged him tighter. "I didn't know if you'd made it. I thought you might have been killed when the Regians took the ship."
"No, I missed out on that battle."
"Thank the stars you did." Camille pulled away from her to look her in the eyes.
"I was lucky in another way. I hoped you were too precious to be killed, and I was right."
Chapter 25. Mezban's troops could have been a useful ally in their effort to defeat the Regians, but Carina didn't trust them. As soon as she could be heard above the noise of celebration, she ordered the black dogs to round up every man and woman who wasn't a member of their band and lock them in the refectory. Lomang, Mezban and Papu were found hiding in the closet of one of the largest suites. They joined their troops after Carina relieved Lomang of his translator and comm and gave them to Parthenia. No Regians were found in the section of the ship where they'd confined the humans. No doubt they had lockable entrances as well as the solid steel walls, but she didn't try to find them. The portals would be exactly the places the Legions would be expecting them to try to force an exit. She had a better idea.
"I don't like this car,"
said Atoy as they stood next to one of the metal seals.
"It'd be better for us all to face them head on, full force. If you two go in, working alone."
"Have you ever been in a firefight with Regians?" asked Carina.
"No, but
this is the best way, believe me. And when we get the rifles to you, remind everyone what I said. Long bursts of fire." Bryce was also here. Carina had been overjoyed to discover he was among the mercs, but their time for catching up had been fleeting. She turned to take a look at him one last time, just in case she never saw him again.
"I know you know what you're doing better than any of us," he said, "but take care."
"You too." "Ready?" asked Parthenia. She nodded. "Let's go." Together they took a drink of elixir from their flasks. Carina closed her eyes, cast, and then opened them again. Cool, humid air enveloped her. The armory Cadwallader had created, which lay on the Regian-occupied side of the Bathsheba, was in complete darkness. "Phew," Parthenia whispered. "No one's around." It was as Carina had expected. The aliens hadn't seen any reason to post guards inside the weapons store. Her demonstration in the gym didn't seem to have given the creatures too much of an indication of what mages could do. She cast fire onto one of the rolled-up napkins she'd brought along. It blazed up, and the flame light reflected from the muzzles of the pulse rifles. One-handed, she grabbed one for herself and gave another to Parthenia. "If we're disturbed, remember to do what I said. I know you hate it. I do too. But nothing else works as well." Seeing the glint of defiance in Parthenia's eyes, she added, "I'm not trying to boss you around. It's the truth. Now hurry, we don't have long." They began to transport the weapons to the mercs waiting on the other side of the ship. Carina sent one row, and then Parthenia transported the row beneath it. A loud, ululating whine sounded, the fire alarm. Quick, Carina urged. It won't take them long to locate the fire. They managed to transport 2 more rows of rifles before the door opened. Instantly, Carina dropped the burning napkins and stamped out the flames. "Now us," she breathed to her sister. "But let me do it." A hulking figure blocked the dim light entering from the passage. She prepared to cast and grabbed her sister's hand. The Regian's body swayed as it looked, or perhaps smelled, for them. Abruptly, it halted. Then it sprang. Before it reached them, they're transported to the metal seal at the Twilight Dome, the Regian side. The lighting was as dim as twilight under a cloudy sky. On the other side of the steel sheet, Atoy and the rest of the Black Dogs would be arming themselves with the newly arrived weapons. But Carina and her sister still had plenty to do. Parthenia's hand was fastened on her arm. Her sister had frozen, staring into the darkness. Then Carina saw it, a single Regian, far down the passageway, facing away from them. "We'll never get past it without it seeing us," she said softly. "Do we need to?" asked Parthenia. "Yes, I don't want to transport directly into the dome. If my guess is right, we could be dead before we know it. So what do we do?" "Get rid of it before it sees us." Parthenia made an anguished face. She averted her gaze, and her grip on Carina's arm became painfully tight. "Do it, then." Carina made the hated cast. When she opened her eyes, in the low light she thought she saw a fissure open on the Regian's back. Instantly, a whistle-like shriek, picked up by the translator around her neck, was transmitted to her comm. The noise pierced her ear, and she grimaced in pain. Parthenia winced and held a hand to the side of her head. The fissure in the creature opened wider. It gaped, and powder issued from the gap, creating a dark cloud that dimmed the light further. The creature's legs buckled and it collapsed, but before it hit the ground, it was gone. Parthenia had watched the Regian's last moments out of the corners of her eyes. As it disappeared, she gasped. "I know," Carina murmured. "I can't explain it. Now we have to." The doors to the Twilight Dome flew open, and aliens tumbled out. A river of the black creatures flowed out. Carina gaped. She had guessed they would see some Regians as they tried to carry out her plan, but she hadn't imagined so many had descended upon the Bathsheba. It was like an infestation. "You were right," Parthenia quietly exclaimed. Carina was already swallowing elixir. It was time to go to their next stop. Mezban's bomb was exactly where Rosa, the person who had disarmed it, had said she'd left it, in the Duchess's armory. She had said she thought it might come in useful one day, and so she'd put it on the merc ship for safekeeping. How lucky they were she had. Understanding how to arm the device and set it to explode had been tricky, but Carina thought she understood. Now her memory was about to be put to the test. Parthenia hovered at the armory door in the silent, dark vessel, keeping watch. The Regians had possibly sealed her off from the Bathsheba, thinking they would foil an escape attempt. But that was no impediment to mages. It was a damned shame they'd alerted the aliens to their presence so early. Firstly by setting off the fire alarm, and secondly by killing the Regian outside the Twilight Dome. By now the creatures had probably entered the section where they'd confined the humans, and were engaged in battle with the mercs. She had to act fast. She opened the device's casing and searched for the components Rosa had described. She halted, confused. "Have you done it?" asked Parthenia. "No, not yet." She peered into the bomb's interior. Her mind had gone a blank. She kept thinking of Darius, Nala, Oriana and Fern, helping the Black Dogs battle the Regians, casting the abhorrent split. It was the only sure way to kill the aliens, but it was a horrible thing for a mage to do. Jace had balked even at the suggestion until Carina had explained the need. She didn't know if he would do it, but at least he would be there to protect the kids. Her thoughts were also consumed with fear for Bryce. He had nothing to defend himself with except a rifle. The people she loved were in dire danger, and she couldn't help feeling that, again, it was her fault. "Carina!" Parthenia barked. "Have you done it?" She looked at her sister helplessly. "Let me arm it," said Parthenia, striding over. "No, it's okay. I can manage." She stared down at the device. "Give it to me." Carina looked at her sister's outstretched hands and back at the bomb. "No, it's fine. I think I remember now." "Will you for once in your life let someone else take control?" She sighed, crushed by the truth of the words. Wordlessly, she lifted the object in her hands and passed it to her sister. Parthenia frowned as she focused on the wires and relays. Deftly, she reached in and made some adjustments. "It's armed." She picked up the detonator. "Back to the Twilight Dome, right?" "Yeah," Carina replied, deflated. Back to the dome. She had suspected the passageway leading to the viewing dome had been sealed off because the Regians were using it for something. For what, she had no idea. But there was nothing else of importance in that part of the ship. No access to the Bathsheba's controls or anything useful. So the place the aliens wanted the humans cut off from was the dome itself. That was why she'd wanted to check it out before going there with the bomb. As it turned out, the decision had worked in her favor. When they reappeared in the passageway, the place seemed empty. The door stood open and the area was silent. The Regians had been drawn away by the disturbance Carina and Parthenia had created. "Let's get in there, fast," said Carina, "before they come back." They raced down the passageway. As they darted inside, however, Parthenia squeaked and drew back. 3 of the aliens remained. Carina caught a glimpse of lines of swollen square objects hanging from struts across the ceiling before she dashed out. They ran back to the steel wall. Her hand moved to the flask at her hip, but Parthenia stopped her. Breathless and wide-eyed, she said, "No, I'll do it." The monsters emerged from the room. Carina cursed and lifted the rifle swinging from her shoulder. Parthenia's canister was already open and its mouth at her lips. The Regians sped toward them, their long bodies rising up on their nimble limbs. Carina fired, but the aliens had already moved into time-shift mode, their figures blurred in the dim light. She held down the trigger, spraying a rapid stream of pulses in an arc across the passageway. Beside her, her sister's eyes were closed. Carina hoped to hell she didn't hesitate. Split was a cast that was never supposed to be used on living things, and it was how their mother had killed Parthenia's father, after her sister had unknowingly given her the elixir to do it. One of the pulses hit its mark, and an oncoming Regian burst into flaming dust. The other 2 were nearly upon them. A jet of liquid burst from one of the creatures. "Parthenia!" Carina heard the fear in her own voice. The liquid splashed onto her sister. Parthenia screamed. Her shrill wail was joined by shrieks from Carina's comm. Just before they reached the sisters, the Regians fell forward onto their crumpling front limbs, spurted black powder, and vanished. Parthenia was still shrieking, her hands raised, fingers splayed, and her mouth an agonized "oh." A line of open, bloody, weeping flesh ran down her cheek and neck. The alien had sprayed her with acid. Trembling, Carina reached for her elixir. After swallowing a mouthful, she wrote the heel character and sent it out to her sister. Parthenia's screaming stopped. Carina opened her eyes. Her sister's skin was whole and healthy, the wound from the acid entirely gone. Parthenia thanked her, but Carina couldn't speak. She was breathing too fast. She hadn't known the Regians had that capability. She couldn't shake the image of her sister's injury from her mind, and she was imagining what could be happening to the mercs on the other side of the ship. What if they'd gotten through the soldiers who were defending the kids? Parthenia grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "It's okay. I'm okay. Come on, we have to set the bomb." Chapter 26. Perhaps because they'd been unable to locate the humans who had infiltrated their section of the Bathsheba, the Regians seemed to have focused their efforts on attacking the ones they could reach. When Carina returned with her sister to the merc side of the vessel, it was thick with aliens, and more were flowing into the area, she saw with dismay. The black ridged backs were everywhere, blurring in and out of focus, and she could smell the terrible odour of burned human flesh. The creatures had been spraying the soldiers with acid. Had they been wearing armour, the effect wouldn't have been devastating, but the black dogs were nearly naked. Carina and Parthenia were near the gym, where Carina had told Atoy to shelter if the Regians showed up. "What now?" asked Parthenia. They had seconds before the aliens noticed them. A hum of words streamed from Carina's comm. "Kill, destroy, eat, execute, infest, massacre, slay." She could also hear the shriek of aliens being split, the rustle of many shell-covered bodies moving and scraping against each other filled her other ear, along with the hissing rattle of their speech that was audible to human hearing. An awful cry broke through the cacophony. Someone had been hit with the corrosive liquid. "Transporters in there," she said, nodding at the gym entrance, which teemed with black carapaces. While Parthenia prepared to cast, she plucked the detonator out of her sister's hands and pressed the switch. A beat later, a dull concussive boom sounded, and a shockwave passed through the deck. As one, the milling Regians froze, and their rustling stilled to silence. The next thing she knew, she was inside the gym. Parthenia had transported them to the side farthest away from the entrance, where the Regians were massed. The mercs held most of the gym, pressing the black bugs into a corner, but the black dogs were in a bad way. Horrific burns had incapacitated many of them, and the line holding back the encroaching aliens looked dangerously thin. She saw Bryce down, his legs burned, but she had no time to go to him. Jace and Darius were healing the injured men and women, Nala was giving them water, and Oriana and Fern appeared to be concentrating on splitting the Regians. Entire sections of the creatures were dissolving into black dust that vanished, but the quantity of them swarming outside the gym told Carina the mercs and mages were fighting a losing battle. She had wondered how the aliens had managed to take the Bathsheba in the first place, but now the answer was clear. They'd simply overwhelmed the black dog's defense with sheer weight of numbers. The creature's stillness as they reacted to the explosion abruptly broke. Some sped away, but others remained and continued their attack. "Car!" yelled Atoy, noticing her arrival. "That was the bomb, right?" "Yeah." On the Regian-held side of the Bathsheba, depressurization was taking place. Carina and Parthenia had cast open on the door to the Twilight Dome and on the access hatches to the lower decks. No matter what the aliens did, they would not be able to close the doors for 10 or 15 minutes at least, by which time the damage would be done. Atmosphere was flying out of the ship, taking aliens with it, as well as anything else not fixed down. It would be mayhem. Carina's plan had been to get rid of most of the enemy this way rather than through a direct attack. It had seemed the best tactic for regaining control with minimal human casualties. The metal seals would prevent depressurization extending to this section. Sending the pulse rifles to the mercs had only been a precaution. But things hadn't gone according to plan. She had anticipated the Twilight Dome would be filled with aliens, but she'd underestimated the sheer amount of them, and she hadn't imagined so many would attack their prisoners. Now the aliens were also protected by the seals. The Black Dogs were facing an insurmountable enemy. The Regions' time-shifting made them hard to kill with pulse fire, and without armor, the mercs were helpless before the aliens' acid attacks. The mages' powers weren't sufficient to tip the balance. 2 mages' efforts had been taken up with healing the soldiers' burns, halving their offensive capability, and their supply of elixir was finite. Even now that she and Parthenia had returned, things looked bad. While Carina had been brooding, Parthenia had begun to help with the healing, and Atoy had returned her attention to the firefight. She called her old friend's name. "What?" Atoy yelled. As she spoke, she turned, revealing a bright red splash of acid burn down her right-hand side. "It's not going to work!" Carina shouted. "We can't retake the Bathsheba!" "Right," said Atoy, digesting the fact. "Got any other ideas?" "Yep, Plan B." "You have a Plan B?" "I just thought of it. Hold the line as long as you can." "Sure." Atoy hefted her rifle to her shoulder and sprayed out a long burst of pulse fire. "I was gonna send everyone on R&R, but we'll stick around." Carina ran to Darius, kneeling next to a woman who had been so badly burned the white of her rib bones showed through the damaged flesh. Her little brother's face was pale and wretched. He'd seen too much death and pain in his short life. After she told him what she needed him to do, he nodded gravely and said, "I'll fix this lady first, okay?" "Okay, sweetheart," Carina replied. Then she ran to speak to her other siblings and lastly to Jace. The mages began work. Groups of the worst injured mercs disappeared first, followed by the walking wounded. When the area behind the fighting men and women was empty, Carina told Fern, Oriana and Darius to transport themselves and Nala next. "No!" Oriana protested. "I want to leave!" Carina hollered. Then she saw Parthenia giving her the stink eye. "Go," she said more quietly. "Please." Oriana turned to her brothers. "Let's get out of here." A few moments later, the 4 children disappeared. With the younger ones out of the way, Carina could concentrate on transporting the remaining mercs strategically to ensure the fewest casualties. Some of them were going to get hurt. It was unavoidable. As their numbers decreased, the Regions would push forward, and the last remaining group would be overrun. Scanning the battle scene, she pointed out sections of fighting men and women to Jace and Parthenia. She didn't transport any herself, wanting to concentrate on the firefight. When the merc she'd indicated had vanished, the Regions quickly moved in, the scrape and rattle of alien hides rubbing together, and their murderous words in her comm grew louder. "You two now!" she yelled to Parthenia and Jace. Parthenia nodded gravely before taking a drink of elixir. But Jace didn't. He touched Carina's arm. "Together." She had no time to argue. The aliens were crushing inward. A long scream rent the air. A merc was down. Carina lifted her canister to her lips and tipped it up. A scant few drops dribbled into her mouth. Empty. She had used it all. Another cry of agony came from the remaining soldiers. Blurring black shapes loomed large in her vision. Then she was gone. Chapter 27. Arms gripped her tightly around her waist and a small head buried itself in her stomach. "I thought you were gonna die," Darius exclaimed, his voice muffled. "I'm still here." Carina put a hand on her brother's head, her heart thumping wildly from her narrow escape. "Don't worry, I'm still alive. Just." She turned to Jace, who stood nearby on the Duchess's bridge. If it hadn't been for his decision to stay with her until the last moment, she and the last few mercs to be transported would have died. "Thanks. I don't know how I—" He raised a hand to stop her.
"A simple thanks is enough. But next time, remember what happened a moment ago. Accept the help that's offered to you. If we all insisted on tackling our problems alone, none of us would succeed. We need each other."
She nodded, took a deep breath and exhaled. "Okay, I hear you." She scanned the bridge. Parthenia and Fern were healing the recently arrived mercs, and other soldiers were leaving on their way to their stations. Bryce and Atoy were nowhere to be seen. Oriana was lifting Nala into a seat. Xiao was already at the flight controls. "We need to get this ship moving," Carina said. "I'm detaching us from the Bathsheba," said Xiao. "Everyone, strap in." The pilot sent the same message over the ship's comm. Carina picked up Darius and thrust him into a seat, then took the next one. "Where's Bryce?" Her seat safety harness slid out and over her before automatically snapping closed. "He's okay," said Parthenia. "I healed him, but I'm all out of elixir. I need to make some more." "No time." "Everyone, strap in," Xiao repeated louder. They had to make a quick getaway before the Regians realized where they'd gone. The Bathsheba was too large and cumbersome to catch the Duchess, and her weaponry was mostly defensive. But the aliens must have arrived in another ship of their own. That vessel was an unknown quantity. A jerk signaled the decoupling of the Duchess from the colony ship. Xiao began to bring her about. Carina hoped the Regians had already discovered Mezban, Lomang, and the rest of the people in the refectory, so they wouldn't bother coming after the mercs. She felt bad about consigning Mezban's troops to a nasty fate, but she couldn't save everyone. As for Mezban, Lomang, and Papu, she didn't spare them a second thought. "Brace for acceleration," Xiao warned. The Duchess slammed forward. Carina grasped the arms of her seat as the G's hit, focusing on keeping her breathing shallow and fast. The interface screen to her left displayed a scanner-derived image of the surrounding space. On it was the asymmetrical bulk of the Bathsheba, and protruding from one of the colony ship's sides, the much smaller Peregrine. She cursed, realizing her mistake. The Duchess had seemed the obvious vessel to take. She had been home for a long time, even before Carina had found her family. And when she had returned to her to retrieve the bomb, she had been fairly certain no Regians were aboard. But the Peregrine was equipped with a particle beam, and she was faster than the merc ship. No point in wasting time on regrets. They'd taken the lesser ship, and that was that. The Regians' vessel wasn't visible, probably due to being obscured by the vast Bathsheba. She hoped the Duchess was a match for the alien ship. Xiao was pulling them away at an almost unendurable speed. Carina struggled to remain conscious. All the kids, including Parthenia, were out already, their heads lolling. A minute passed, and then two. She imagined the situation aboard the Bathsheba. The Regians would have registered the departure of the Duchess. How would they react? Would they launch their own vessel? It would take time to crew her and move her from the lee of the colony ship. Carina reached out to the interface screen, fighting the acceleration force trying to pin her arm to her seat, and searched for nearby star systems. If the worst came to the worst, and the Regians seemed about to recapture them, they might be able to escape to a planet. A star system appeared, containing one habitable world. Its gravity was 0.5 standard, but that would only make things easier if they ended up in a survival situation. Then she remembered an important point. The Bathsheba had nearly arrived at the Region's intended destination. Damn! The planet she was looking at was one of theirs, and going there would be a death sentence. Something else caught her attention. Beyond the Region system, an area of dark grey cloud hung in the void. The conglomeration of gases resembled a nebula, but it didn't look like any nebula she had ever seen. She switched the display to pure scan data and blinked. The figures were going haywire. Some movement was to be expected due to the Duchess's increasing velocity, but it should have been steady and predictable. The data was changing in a chaotic fashion. She couldn't make any sense of it. The grey cloud couldn't be a representation of a known object, but an attempt to show something unknown. In all the time she'd spent aboard starships, she'd never encountered something the computers couldn't identify. But the strange phenomenon outside the Region's star system was the least of her worries. They might need a planetary escape route, and none lay nearby. On the other hand, perhaps they wouldn't need a sanctuary. Several minutes had passed with no sign of pursuit. Were the Regions content with the humans still in their possession? She hardly dared hope so. The colony ship was a lost cause, and without the deep sleep capsules, the voyage to Earth would have to be postponed or even abandoned. But at least they would be safe. "Fuck!" Xiao exclaimed. Carina took a moment to see what had alarmed the pilot, but when she did, her heart sank into her boots. The Peregrine was pulling away from the Bathsheba. Who was flying her? It seemed weird the Regions would use an unfamiliar ship to try to catch them. Whatever the explanation, Mezban's destroyer was going to come after them, and unless a miracle also came their way, they were screwed. "What should I do?" Xiao yelled, though the bridge was nearly silent save for the hum of the Duchess's engines. Carina didn't know what to answer. In situations like these, Cadwallader would be the one giving the orders. Attoy was next in command, but she wasn't on the bridge, and the weapons officer was also absent. Just keep doing what you're doing." Straining with effort, she touched the interface again, opening the Duchess's weapon system. She brought all the pulse cannons online and readied them. "Do you know what you're doing?" asked Xiao, squinting over her shoulder. "Not exactly, but I'm the best we have right now." Part of her interface screen displayed the scan data. The Peregrine was advancing on them at breathtaking speed. She wondered if the Regions' exoskeletons allowed them to endure more Gs than humans could. She fixed her gaze on the data, her fingers hovering over the screen, waiting for the moment the destroyer came within range. Their only hope was to take the ship out before its particle beam fired. The beam's range was shorter than the Duchess's cannon, but a direct hit would cripple or destroy her. The numbers ticked down. A split second before they hit effective range, she pressed down, firing at exactly the right moment. The screen tracked the pulse's silent progress across space. The Peregrine fired defensively, and its own pulses annihilated most of the Duchess's long before they reached their target. One got through, however, and impacted the destroyer's hull, its energy splashing into space. The hit was nowhere near enough to slow the Peregrine's onward progress. The ship flew on, unaffected. The Duchess's pulse cannon powered up again. Carina fired, and again the bolts of pure energy sped across the void. The Peregrine's response was rapid and devastating. This time, none of the pulses made it through, and all the while the distance between the two ships was closing. She watched the readouts from the Duchess's cannon, willing them to operate faster, even though she knew it was hopeless, that the battle was already lost. Then the thing she'd been dreading happened. The Peregrine's particle beam lanced out. "No!" she whispered. "No!" A beat later she was thrown violently forward. The straps of her safety harness dug in painfully. The merc vessel's acceleration had abruptly cut out. The hum of her engines had been silenced. An almost inaudible click sounded, and she gently floated up from her seat, restrained only by her harness. "What's happened?" asked Parthenia groggily as she regained consciousness. "Did we get away? Oh!" She grabbed the straps holding her down. "Gravity's out," Carina said. "Along with the engines, I think. Shao?" "Yeah," the pilot said grimly. "They took the brunt of the hit from the particle beam. We're dead in the water." Only inertia was carrying the Duchess onward now. "Particle beam?" asked Parthenia. "From the Peregrine," Shao explained. The other children were also coming around. The pilot went on to briefly tell them what had happened. "I'll make some more elixir," Parthenia said, unfastening the straps of her harness. She floated free, turned in the air, and gripped the back of her seat as if about to push herself toward the door. "We don't have time," said Carina. She checked the interface. The destroyer had nearly caught up to them. "We can still fight back," Fern said. "We have weapons and—" "You're too young," interrupted Carina. Then Atoy opened a comm to her. "We can't suit up. All the armor has been moved to the Bathsheba, so we'll just have to do without. When they get here, let me know where they're gonna come through." "Shit," said Carina. She sagged, utterly defeated. The Peregrine would catch up to them in minutes, and without power from the engines, the pulse cannon were dead. They'd fought so hard and come so close to escape, but now the Regians were going to recapture them and take them to whatever horrors awaited on their planet. "The mages can't help you either. We're just about out of elixir. I hate to say it, but maybe we should surrender. If they take us to their planet, we might find a way to—" "What are you talking about?" Atoy's tone was harsh. "We fight. That's what the Black Dogs do. With or without armor and magical backup, if we die, it beats the alternative. Let me know where they're coming in." The comm went dead. At the same moment, the Duchess gave a slight judder. The Peregrine had arrived, but when Carina checked her interface, she saw the destroyer hadn't docked with the merc ship. Instead, a thick cable ran between the two vessels. The judder had been the impact of the grip of the end of the Peregrine's cable fastening onto the Duchess's hull. The cable tightened and straightened. The destroyer was beginning to slow down, and, now the vessels were joined, so was the merc ship. "They aren't going to board us," she told the room. "What?" Xiao also checked her screen. "Cowards! The Regians are going to tow us back to the Bathsheba," Carina explained to her siblings. "Where," she mentally added, "their huge numbers will overwhelm any defense we could mount." "Can we break the tow line?" Fern asked. "Without the engines, all our weapons are dead." "Maybe we could unlock it from the hull with a cast," Parthenia suggested. "We must have a little elixir left somewhere." "They would just reattach it. Unless we have a fixed destroyed engines cast, there's nothing we can do." "Car," Atoy said angrily over her comm. "Where?" "Nowhere yet." She told her friend the situation. Atoy's curse was cut off as she closed the comm. The slowing of the Duchess increased abruptly, and Carina was thrown against her harness, hard. Parthenia flew across the bridge and hit the wall. She yelled with pain and remained spread-eagled against the vertical surface. "Stay where you are," Carina called out. "It's safer. I don't have a lot of choice about it." After another minute, the bridge door opened. A hand grabbed each side of the doorway, and then Atoy glided in. She gripped the back of Xiao's seat to halt her progress. "I have a suggestion," she said to Carina. "I'd love to hear it." Atoy glanced at the children and pushed off from the pilot's seat to bring herself close to Carina, holding on to an armrest while her legs floated in midair. She leaned down to bring her lips to Carina's ear. "The Duchess can self-destruct. Cadwallader told me about it when I got my promotion." Carina reared back in shock. "What the hell? What happened to we fight?" "If it was just us against the Regians on the Peregrine, we might have stood a chance," Atoy replied quietly. "Not much of one, but a chance nevertheless. If we go up against all the aliens aboard the Bathsheba, it'll be a massacre. Like I said, death beats the only alternative we have open to us right now." Carina gazed at the faces of her brothers and sisters as they watched her and her friend, unsure of what was being discussed. They were so young, only beginning their lives. Was dying really the best the future had to offer them? She had thought so once, after witnessing the suffering Ma had gone through. Rape, imprisonment, slavery, torture. She had risked so much for a chance at freedom for her family, thinking even if she died, even if they were all killed, it was better than living a life in torment. Now she was no longer so sure. So many times her family had been in situations that seemed hopeless, only for them to find a way out. No matter what they had to endure, there was always hope. "We have to do it," Atoy urged. "At this distance, we'll take out those fuckers on the destroyer too." Carina stared at her friend. Risking death was one thing, but welcoming it with open arms? "No, absolutely not. I can't. I just can't." Atoy's lips thinned to a line and her eyes narrowed. "Easy for you to say. What does that mean?" "The Regians will keep you all alive. The rest of us will be dishes on the menu." She turned and propelled herself out of the room. "Atoy!" Carina called after her. "Atoy!" Chapter 28. The mercs waited at the docking port. Though they weren't suited up, they'd found time during the short chase and retrieval of the Duchess to put on some clothes. A few were barefoot. Footwear hardly mattered in 0G. Perhaps they expected to die soon and never enter the artificial gravity of the Bathsheba. Within the merc ship, Parthenia and Jace were guarding Darius and Nala, and Fern and Oriana were desperately trying to make elixir. But their attempts while the Duchess was being towed to the colony ship had all been failures. Sustaining a fire in 0G seemed impossible. What does it matter? Carina thought. Even if the twins had managed to brew huge quantities of the stuff, the mages would only be able to forestall the inevitable. She couldn't see a way to defeat the hordes of Regians awaiting them, especially without armor to protect them from the creature's deadly acid. She could only hope an opportunity to escape would open up. Was Atoy right? Was she sacrificing the black dogs to a horrific fate in order to save the lives of her family? Her goal of returning to Earth had resulted in exposing her brothers and sisters to deathly danger many times, and weighed heavily enough on her mind. And then there was her execution of Sable Dirksen. If she hadn't killed the clan leader, the mercs might not even be here. Cadwallader might be alive. She squeezed her eyes shut and pushed the thought away. A jolt ended the forward progress of the Duchess. Most of the mercs were gripping handholds lining the Duchess's walls, but a few glided onward and hit the docking port hatch in a jumble. Jeers and insults erupted from the gathered soldiers as the men and women disentangled themselves to resume their positions, but Carina noticed an edge to the customary black-humoured banter. The dark jokes about wanting to be appetizers for the Regions and going for chemical skin peels sounded hollow, even desperate. Bryce was here, telling her with his eyes that he loved her. The young soldier who was Parthenia's friend was here too. Had the two of them even had a chance to speak? Atoy's face was hard and determined. She was in fight mode, but Carina guessed her friend remained angry with her for refusing to agree to self-destruct. What might Atoy now suffer due to her decision? She couldn't bear to think about it. Tense seconds ticked past. She strained her ears for the sound of the docking port being forced open, but no noises issued from it. What were the Regions doing? Why weren't they trying to board the Duchess and recapture the failed escapees? Atoy was cursing under her breath, and other mutterings arose from the rest of the mercs. Carina knew how they felt. The waiting was unbearable. It was also deeply puzzling. What possible reason could the Regions have for the delay? Didn't they intend to enter the merc's vessel at all? Did they plan on simply taking it along with the Bathsheba until they reached their planet? A tiny flame of hope flared. If the aliens were to leave them alone for a while, even a few hours, they could escape yet. The mages might figure out a way to make elixir, and she and Atoy would have time to think up a good plan. Ideas began to race through her head. Perhaps they could rig up some kind of massive flamethrower. If they could take out hundreds of Regions at once, and if the mages could split tens at a time, the mercs might be able to wipe up the rest. "Hey, Atoy!" Carina called. But as her friend turned her head, the screech of a forced metal mechanism sounded from the docking port hatch, setting her teeth on edge. The mercs readied their weapons. "What?" said Atoy. "Never mind." The screech intensified, and she winced at the painful noise. "Ready," Atoy warned. Crack! The hatch seal split, and the hatch swung inward. Beyond it lay the dimness of the Region-infested Bathsheba. A puff of chilled atmosphere hit Carina's face. Figures moved in the darkness, but they were not the figures she expected to see. "Fire!" yelled Atoy. Pulses blazed from the mercs' rifles, turning twilight into day on the Region side, revealing not the aliens, but Mezban's soldiers. And toward the rear of them stood Mezban herself and Lomang. The Regions had freed them and sent them to deal with the black dogs. The creatures had pitted human against human, relying on one side to betray the other. And it had worked. Mezban and Lomang had agreed to recapture the mercs and mages, perhaps in return for their own freedom. Had it been the smuggler and his spouse who had come after them in the Peregrine, it would explain why it had taken so long before the Duchess's port had been forced open. They would have needed the time to dock their ship at the Bathsheba. But the Region's ploy might work in the Black Dog's favour. The mercs were used to fighting other soldiers, and though their lack of armour was a big disadvantage, they might win. Atoy was urging her soldiers forward, attempting to turn the defence into an offence. It was a desperate measure, but so was their situation. Also, they had a psychological edge. Mezban's troops would remember keenly that the mercs had defeated them once before, and they might fear they would do so again. A forward push from the black dogs could trigger them into turning tail. Carina berated herself for not spacing the lot of them, especially Mezban and Lomang. She hadn't spared the latter due to mercy. She'd simply been too busy arranging the mages and mercs' escape, and had assumed the Regions would take care of them. The fighting intensified as Mezban's soldiers fired volley after volley. The mercs were forced back and into the few available spaces to shelter. Something flew through the open port and landed with a metallic clunk. Grenade! A convulsion ran through the sheltering men and women. A man ran forward, bent and scooped up the device. It was Parthenia's friend. He made ready to throw the grenade back through the port, but before he could, he collapsed. He fell heavily, unconscious before he hit the deck, landing with the grenade under him. The mercs closest to him began to drop where they stood, their eyes closing and their knees buckling. The effect passed through the soldiers like an invisible ripple. A moment after the first man had fallen, it hit Carina. The device one of Mezban's troops had thrown into the Duchess wasn't a grenade. It was a canister of gas, knockout gas. Within minutes it would be circulated through the air filtration system, and all aboard the Duchess would be unconscious and could be safely taken prisoner. The gas reached her, and blackness swooped down. Chapter 29. Parthenia woke up on her back on what felt like cold, hard tile. She opened her eyes. She was looking at a ceiling that seemed familiar, yet it was not at all what she expected. Groggily, she tried to figure out what had happened. The last thing she remembered was being aboard the Duchess, trying to keep Darius and Nala occupied, while the Regians towed the ship to the Bathsheba. Nala had been telling a fanciful story about a kingdom of horses, the animals they'd ridden on Pyrene. The horses could talk, and they were debating about which of them should be their new king and queen. Darius had been watching her, entranced as always by her tales. The ship had come to a halt, which meant they'd reached their destination. She had been thinking that if the black dogs failed to fight off the Regians, an almost impossible task, the aliens would soon come for her and her siblings. Oriana and Fern had been struggling to start a fire. If only they had more elixir. The twins had enclosed splinters of wood in a wire mesh to hold them together in the 0G, and where was she? She shook the fog from her mind. As she sat up, she recognized her surroundings immediately. She was in the Bathsheba's refectory, where Lomang and Mezban had imprisoned the mercs after taking them out of stasis, and they were all back here again. Around her sat and stood the men and women of the Black Dogs. She started in fear. Where were her brothers and sisters? She swung around and then exhaled in relief. All her siblings except Carina were lying behind her, still unconscious. What had happened, and where was her sister? How had she and everyone else gotten from the merc ship to the colony vessel? She couldn't recall a thing since that final moment in the Duchess's galley. Hey! Carina was standing over her. Her sister reached out a hand and pulled her to her feet. They hugged, and Carina looked her in her eyes. How are you feeling? Okay, I just don't understand. They gassed the ship, knocked us all unconscious. Then they carried us here, I guess. Are you sure you're okay? Yes, just about. In truth, she still felt befuddled. Do you still have your translator and comm? She put a hand to her chest and touched her ear. I do. I never took them off. Great. I have mine too. It'll help a lot if we can understand what the Regians are saying. I suppose it will. She rubbed her forehead. Sorry, I'm still groggy. On the floor next to her, Fern and Oriana were beginning to stir, though Darius and Nala remained out of it. Perhaps their smaller bodies took longer to process the gas. Carina said, I know it's a lot to handle. Parthenia, you were a tremendous help to me before when we set the bomb and escaped. If it weren't for Lomang and Mezban, we might have made it. Now we're going to have to pull another stunt or two. Are you up to it? I need you." Of course I'll help." Carina squeezed her upper arm and then strode off, no doubt on her way to talk to someone about a plan. Parthenia was gratified and comforted by her sister's praise and faith in her. It seemed their relationship had turned a corner. The change in Carina's attitude had been a long time coming, but now it had arrived. It was very welcome. She spotted Jace talking to Bryce. She waved to get the mage's attention, hoping he would come over. She wanted to talk to him, but she didn't want to leave the children. They would be confused and scared as they came around. Jace noticed her, said something to Bryce, and began to head toward her, but the refectory doors suddenly drew back. Armed soldiers poured in, barking orders, telling everyone to move back. The mercs froze for a moment, hesitating. Then a group, Atoy among them, rushed the troops, trying to grab their weapons. But the soldiers quickly responded with stun rounds and cracked their rifle butts on the resistors' skulls. The skirmish was soon over, and the remaining black dogs waited, tense and angry. Meanwhile, the rest of Mezban's troops formed a wedge, its point protruding into the room and the wide base blocking the exit. The soldiers at the outer edge of the formation scanned the prisoners until one pointed at something and spoke to his buddy. The two marched forward, joined by a third. They were heading for Carina. Mercs drew together in front of her, but the soldiers aimed their rifles at them. Carina pushed her defenders aside and walked forward to meet the oncoming soldiers. One of them took out a black bag, and another went behind her and tied her wrists together. Carina's gaze sought Parthenia's. Just before the bag was lowered over her head, she called out, "Look after the kids!" "I will," Parthenia shouted back, her heart in her mouth. She watched, aghast, as the soldiers led Carina away, guiding her roughly. She stumbled, and a soldier dragged her to her feet, drawing rumbles of displeasure from the black dogs. She disappeared into the wedge of soldiers, and a line of disturbance formed as she was led through them and out of the room.
"Parthenia, where are we?"
Darius asked. He had finally woken up, and so had Nala. Oriana and Fern were now fully conscious, but they'd remained quiet, apparently immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. "Shh," Parthenia whispered. "Don't move. Stay down." As she returned her attention to Mezban's troops, another of them lifted an arm and pointed. He was pointing at her. She started and took a step back. Again, 3 soldiers marched out from the wedge. "No!" a voice in the crowd yelled. She saw Camille running toward her, but a soldier fired at him. He fell, hitting his head on the edge of a table as he went down. "Camille!" She managed only a few steps in his direction before the soldiers reached her. One grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. She screamed in pain. "Don't hurt my sister!" Darius yelled. "Let me go!" she pleaded. She couldn't be taken away like Carina. She had to stay with her brothers and sisters. She struggled and fought, but the men were much stronger than her. Her other arm was pulled inexorably behind her. Large, rough hands drew her wrists together, and something snapped closed around them. With horror, she saw a black bag open in front of her face. She fought again, desperately trying to wrench herself free, dreading the idea of the suffocating black material over her head. She heard Nala cry out, "Leave her alone!" "No, please," she begged. "Please, I have to stay with—" The bag descended and darkness smothered her. Again she screamed. She writhed and kicked, threshing like a wild thing. Pain exploded in her stomach. She had been stunned. She had a faint sensation of hands lifting her, but after that, nothing. Chapter 30. The next time she awoke, she was in utter darkness, and the air felt unbearably humid and close. She could barely breathe. When she tried to move, her wrists sent out stabbing pains and her arms ached. She turned her head, and her mouth touched textile. Instantly, everything came flooding back. Mezban's soldiers, Carina being taken away, the black bag over her head, and the stunning pulse round. She twisted and felt a flat, smooth surface underneath her. Her wrists complained louder. Panic rose. She couldn't bear the idea of the bag covering her eyes, nose, and mouth. Her breathing quickened until she was panting in fear. What if the bag didn't allow in enough air? She already felt lightheaded and nauseated. Am I already running out of oxygen? Help! Please, take this bag off me, please! The thick material muffled her voice. She struggled to sit up, wriggling her shoulders and pressing down with her sore wrists. Sweat prickled her face and neck. When she was finally sitting, she leaned forward and shook her head, trying to dislodge the stifling bag. Then she had an idea. She bent farther forward and opened her knees. As soon as she felt the material of the bag brush her kneecaps, she closed her knees again. Holding them together firmly, she lifted her head, drawing off the bag. She was still in darkness, but now she could breathe. As she leaned back in relief, her back hit a wall. She reached out with her fingertips to touch it, cold metal. She shuffled sideways on her bottom and quickly encountered another wall. Moving in the opposite direction brought the same result. She tried to stand, but before she rose much higher than kneeling position, the crown of her head struck the ceiling. She walked forward on her knees. A few steps brought her to a fourth wall. She was inside a windowless metal box, every dimension measuring less than 1.5 meters. The panic she'd successfully fought off began to return. Her pulse raced. How long would she have to stay here? Would the Regians leave her here forever? They wanted her mage skills. It made no sense to let her suffocate or die of thirst, yet she couldn't rid herself of the fear. She lay down and curled up on her side, closing her eyes against the darkness. Images of her brothers and sisters as she'd last seen them in the Bathsheba's refectory flickered through her mind. Where were they all now? Were they all inside metal cubes like hers? Were they alone and frightened too? Tears dripped from the side of her face onto the floor. So much for her brave assertion she would help Carina. All the Regians had to do was to put her in a box, and she was a wreck. Through her feelings of weakness and helplessness, she became aware of a vibration through the floor and realized she recognized the sensation. It was the throb of a starship engine. Was she still aboard the Bathsheba? She didn't recall noticing the vibration of the colony ship's engines before. She had assumed the vessel's size dampened them out. So, if she wasn't on the Bathsheba, was she on the Regian ship? Or was she already aboard a shuttlecraft and being taken down to their planet? Their world had to be her final destination. What would happen there? She shuddered. The aliens would want her to cast for them. That much was certain. Should she? Or should she fake terror like she had before? Not very much faking would be required. Parthenia didn't know how long she'd been trapped inside the cube, except that it seemed like hours. She had pushed against all the sides, the ceiling and the floor, until she was exhausted. After that, she had lain on her side for a long time, trying to mentally still her fears. Finally, she'd fallen asleep and dreamt about being trapped at the bottom of a deep well, the water gradually rising. She could see the bright circle of the opening, and peering down at her was her father, laughing and waving. She called out to him as the water rose above her shoulders and crept up her neck, imploring him to throw down a rope and pull her up, but he'd only laughed louder. When the water was above her nose, she woke up, at first relieved to realize it had only been a nightmare, and then despairing when she understood she remained in the box. With some difficulty, she turned over in order to ease her aches. She felt like crying again, but she was all out of tears. In all the dangerous and terrifying situations she'd been in since Carina had rescued her and her siblings from the Shurers, she didn't think she'd encountered any quite as horrible or dire as this. As she lay down on her other side, however, she noticed something had changed. Something was different. She sat up and looked around, trying to penetrate the pitch dark. No chink of light offered itself, and no breath of current stirred the air. Yet she was certain she wasn't imagining the alteration. She inhaled sharply. The floor was no longer vibrating. Before she had time to process the fact, one side of the box fell open and hit the floor with a deafening clang. She grimaced as light and chill air flooded in. She blinked and shivered, catching a glimpse of the interior of a chamber, and through an opening, a dark grey landscape beyond. A Region stepped in front of her, its long articulated legs obscuring her view. She uttered a short scream and drew back. The lid of the box lifted and the remaining sides collapsed. More Regions stood around her. She cringed, drawing in her shoulders and knees. "No eyes, no see." The voices were coming from her comm. The translator still hung around her neck. No eyes, no see? What did the Regions mean? Were they going to put out her eyes? Sheer terror overcame her. She leapt to her feet on wobbling legs and tried to run. A pincered limb rose and pushed her shoulder, and she toppled down, but not as hard as she expected. She felt curiously light. The gravity on the Region's planet was less than standard. 2 more sets of pincers picked up the black bag lying on the floor of the box. "No, not that again. I'll keep my eyes closed, I promise." But if the Regions understood her, they didn't care about her horror of the bag. In another moment, it was over her head again. Pincers plucked at her clothes and then fastened on her shirt with a firm hold before dragging her upward. The curved tips of more pincers prodded her back and backside, encouraging her to move. She managed to stagger upright and walk. Walking in darkness, knowing if she tripped she couldn't break her fall with her hands, was deeply unnerving. Where were they taking her, and what would happen when she arrived? Did they understand she needed elixir in order to cast? How would she communicate the ingredients she needed or the process? And if she couldn't make them understand, what would they do? She had heard the Regions regarded humans as food. If they thought she was useless to them, would they? She swallowed and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. Almost as bad as her horror of being eaten alive was her concern for her brothers and sisters. Protecting her siblings had been part of her life for as far back as she could remember. First from their father, and later from the many dangers that had faced them. But now they were beyond her care. Would she ever see them again? She would do whatever she could to survive. She would cast for the aliens. They weren't like her father. They didn't understand the things mages could do. She would find out where Carina and her other siblings were being held, and they would escape the Region's world together, somehow. Then she remembered Camille. Was he already on the planet too? She needed to find him and the rest of the mercenaries. She couldn't leave them all to be eaten. The stony ground suddenly sloped downward and she stumbled. Her knees impacted sharp edges that cut into her skin. She cried out in pain as Regian's words came through her comm. Move, walk, step, walk, run. She climbed to her feet, her breath puffing out the material of the bag. Blood dribbled down her legs. She walked on carefully, trying to avoid falling again. The slope grew steeper until she was struggling to remain upright, though the ridges helped her to grip the ground. As she'd been walking, a rustling noise had risen around her, a noise that was horribly familiar. She knew from the fight with the Regions in the Bathsheba's gym that she was hearing the creatures' bodies rub up against each other. She was clearly in some kind of Region habitation. After she'd been walking for about 20 minutes, the ground quickly evened out and she could tread more easily again. A jab from a pincer pushed her in another direction. A new, gentler slope appeared beneath her feet, and at the same time an odour arose from the base of the bag enclosing her head. A musty, cloying, sickening stench, like the fungus Father used to like to eat, mixed with the smell of rotting meat. Something long and hard cracked against her shins, and she tumbled forward, her face smacking into the ground. But it didn't hurt badly. The low, sharp ridges had been replaced by a soft substance that cushioned her fall. Before she could rise again, the bag was ripped from her head. Chapter 31. I told you once I was your nemesis, said Mezban, smirking, and I was correct. Carina knelt at the woman's feet, held there by Papu's hand on her shoulder. She guessed the audience with Mezban and Lomang was a short stop on her way to somewhere else, in the company of the Regions. The aliens crowded at the door of the small room. She could hear the creature's words through her comm. Bring them, soon, enough, near, finish. This isn't over yet, Carina replied. You're going to regret what you've done, and then we'll see who's the nemesis around here. You're right, it isn't over, though for you it will be shortly. But before you go to live out the rest of your sad, incarcerated life on the Region's planet, I want something. Tell me where you've hidden the Ember Gems. I know you must have taken them from the Zenobia. Mezban leaned forward and her dark hair hung down, partially obscuring her face, but her eyes glinted like the precious stones of which she spoke. Carina had almost forgotten about the jewellery Lomang had stolen from his wife, prompting her to follow his sorry ass all the way to another galactic sector. She had only given a couple of the beautiful gems as payment for repairing and refitting the Duchess. It took her a moment to recall what had happened to the rest. Then she remembered. At the beginning of their journey, after the mercs had captured the Bathsheba, she had put the stones in a safe in a storage room, along with the ancient mage documents. I don't have the jewels anymore. I traded them all at Martha's Rest. Mezban snorted with laughter. For what? A city? A country? That's their worth. How was I to know their value? I got what I needed with them. That was all I cared about. The likelihood of her ever seeing the stones again was looking extremely remote. But she was damned if she was going to give them up to this despicable traitor of her own kind. So it was you who came after us in the destroyer? I thought it was the Regions.
It was indeed,
Lomang replied, his hands folded on his fattened belly.
We offered, you see. knowing only the Peregrine could catch you and incapacitate your ship.
You're even stupider than I thought. You did the Regians' dirty work when you could have flown away freely. That would have meant giving up the Ember Gems, replied Mezban. But you would have gotten away with your lives. Do you really think the Regians are just going to let you leave?
They will.
Lomang nodded sagely, repeating,
They will. But you won't see it. After you and your family are gone, we will return to our home world and live out our lives in peace. And perhaps one day we will have the opportunity to purchase another intersector ship, and we will journey again into your sector and relieve it of the best of its wares.
Not without my jewels, we won't, Mezban spat, giving her husband a deathly glare. He ducked his head, immediately subdued. Mezban rose to her feet. Where are they? Carina smiled. I told you I don't have any left, and even if I did have some hidden away somewhere, what are you going to threaten me with if I refuse to hand them over? Imprisonment? Torture? My family turned into slaves? The black dogs consumed by monsters? The woman strode over and slapped her hard across the cheek. Is that the best you've got? Carina asked, unfazed. I'd leave the beating of the prisoners to your brother-in-law if I were you. Tell me where you've hidden my gems! Mezban stamped one of her little feet. Or Papu will batter you within an inch of your life. Carina shrugged. It wouldn't be for the first time, and he won't actually kill me. You can't afford to anger the Regians. Nine-Eye had taught her mind control techniques that would enable her to shut out the pain from a sustained beating, though she would feel the effects while she recovered. She was more worried about her siblings, as well as Bryce, Jace, and the black dogs. She was the only one who knew the location of the gems. If Mezban got it into her tiny mind that someone else might know the secret, she might attempt to extract it from them by force. Voices came through her comm. Finish! No, wait! Bring them! Soon! So you've lost the Bathsheba, she said. All the contraband you were smuggling, and the Ember Gems. And now you're about to lose your miserable lives. It might not look like it just yet, but I think I'm actually going to come out the winner here. My family and I will survive, and soon we'll have our liberty too. The Regians might keep us captive for a short while, but we'll find a way to escape. It isn't hard for mages. We will not lose our lives, Mezban seethed. It is you who has lost. You've lost everything. Carina looked over her shoulder at the Regians gathered in the doorway. You know what? Regians have been raiding the district where I grew up for centuries. So long, in fact, they've become part of the local mythology. The same is true in your culture, right? That means they've been capturing humans and bringing them here for a very long time. Easily long enough to learn our languages well. I bet they understand more of our speech than you think. My guess is they've overheard both of you talking about the Ember Gems, and the only reason they're allowing us this time together is because they want to discover the stone's location for themselves. If I were to tell you where I may have hidden them, they'll have everything they wanted. Mages, the black dogs, you and your soldiers, and finally the Ember Gems. As soon as I name the hiding place, they'll probably come in here right away to grab you. Mezban's features fell, and she glanced at her husband. He returned her gaze with fear in his eyes. You have discussed the jewels around the Regians, haven't you? Pallor overtaking the rich olive of her skin, Mezban returned uncertainly to her seat.
It's all nonsense,
said Papu, his deep voice rumbling.
Your soldiers are armed, Mezban. The Regians would never have allowed them to carry weapons if they didn't intend to let us leave."
Lomang relaxed and grinned.
"You are right, dear brother."
He turned to his wife.
"Papu speaks the truth, my dear. We have nothing to fear. The mage is only trying to beguile us, as is her way. We mustn't listen to her drivel."
He focused on Carina.
"You have one chance remaining to tell us where you hid the gems, or suffer the consequences."
Leaning forward and narrowing his eyes, he said,
"You can do your magic with only one hand, right?"
"Are you sure your soldiers are still armed? Do you even know where they are?" Mezban started with alarm and peered beyond the Regians outside the room.
"Take no notice,"
Lomang said.
"She's only trying to frighten and confuse us."
To Carina he said,
"I'm warning you, one final chance."
She sighed. "I guess there's only one way of finding out which of us is right. No, we no longer want to know where the jewels are. Lomang, we must leave."
"I'm telling you, she's fooling us, dear wife. She's only angry she must give up the gems to us before she enters into slavery. She hopes to get her revenge by tricking us into leaving without them."
"I do not want the stones!" Mezban exclaimed. "You don't?" Carina asked. "Oh, but I insist. Let me tell you where you can find them. They're—" "Be silent!" yelled Mezban. "Papu, knock her out. I don't want her to utter another word. Lomang, if you don't come with me, I'm leaving without you. I'll take the peregrine and the Regians can have you."
"Papu, don't touch her,"
said Lomang.
"Let her speak."
Papu looked from the wife to the husband, as if unsure who to obey. The hand on Carina's shoulder relaxed. "You idiot!" Mezban shrieked at Lomang. "Why did I ever marry you? You've brought me nothing but trouble. You're too stupid even to understand how stupid you are. You've stolen from me, lied, cheated, dragged me into your ridiculous schemes, and ruined my life." The small woman was working herself into a paroxysm of fury. Her face glowed red, her eyes looked about to pop from their sockets, and her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. Despite her personal worries, Carina couldn't help but chuckle. Lomang was dumb, sure enough, but so was Mezban, just in a different way. If the woman had been smart, she would have left a couple of minutes ago and been on her way to her ship. The Regians might have been caught unawares, and she could have escaped. But instead, her temper had gotten the better of her. She'd missed her opportunity, and now she was going to pay. Carina stood up. "I hid the gems in the viewing dome." None of the humans present heard her. Lomang was attempted to soothe his irate wife while she ranted and railed at him, hitting his chest with her tiny fists. And Papu was watching them with sad resignation. Carina cleared her throat and repeated herself, louder. "I hid the gems in the viewing dome." Mezban heard her and turned, her jaw dropping open, words drying in her mouth. The Regians shifted restlessly, scraping their carapaces against each other. Carina faced the aliens. "The viewing dome, at the top of the ship, where I set the bomb. I hid the gems behind the bar. They might still be there." Though Lomang and Mezban were out of her immediate sight, she was sure she could feel them freeze. The aliens stopped moving, and for a moment all was silent and still. All hell broke loose. Regians surged into the room and grabbed Carina with their pincers, tugging her toward the door. She looked back. Mezban screamed as the aliens reached her. Papu tried to run and was drowned in a sea of black carapaces. Lomang gaped when the creatures descended on him, appearing amazed at this ill turn of fate against all his expectations. As Carina was dragged away and the black bag was thrust over her head once more, she smiled a grim smile of satisfaction. Chapter 32. Parthenia vigorously rubbed the 2 pieces of organic fibrous material together. She'd lost count of the time she'd performed the same action, all with the identical result: no fire, not even a thread of smoke. Her fingers were raw from her efforts, and her back ached from crouching over the shallow depression she'd dug in the floor of the pit where the Regians had put her. The method had worked for Fern on Ostalon when Carina had transported them to different places on the planet. She was sure she was doing it right, according to what he'd told her. Perhaps the material was too damp. Everything was damp down here in the Regian city. The air was so humid it was as if you could wring water out of it. Her hair had turned into a ball of frizz, and her clothes felt moist to the touch. It was also cold. She was chilled to the bone. She could almost feel the water in the atmosphere leaching the heat from her. If only she could make a fire. It wouldn't only allow her to cast as the Regian king had commanded. The flames would also help to keep her warm. She was no splicer, but she knew her health would quickly decline in the conditions, and she might have only days to live. A shadow moved above her, shifting the meagre light that penetrated from the Regian metropolis above. Her guard was checking on her again. Ready. Now. King. No, I'm not ready. I can't make fire. Can you bring me some type of fire? I need naked flames. If you can do that, I'll cast for your king. Not word. Ready. Now. King. No, she exclaimed, standing up. I need fire. Fire, fire, fire. Why can't you understand? How can you not know what fire is? One of the first things humans learned to do was to make fire. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we were hardly more than animals. How can you build cities and starships, and yet you can't make fire? Not word. King wait. Anger ready. Infest family. Ugh, she shuddered. She didn't know exactly what the guard meant by infest family, but it sounded bad. Please apologize to your king for me. Say, I'm really sorry. I need more time. The guard didn't move for some moments. Then the light shifted again and the creature was gone. Parthenia flopped down and picked up the pieces of fibrous material. Doggedly she rubbed them over the shredded embers in the depression. The guard had tried to bring her everything she'd asked for. The container seemed to be fashioned from a shell, and the opening was a little narrow, but it would suffice. The water was so murky she hadn't dared to drink it yet, though she was dreadfully thirsty. The metal... How did the Regians have metal if they couldn't understand the concept of fire? The metal was perfect, fine filings. Perhaps the only problem was that the aliens didn't know the word fire. They definitely appeared to struggle to understand other things she'd said. She stopped rubbing and held up the objects in her hands for inspection. Each about the size of her fist, they were flat on one side and tangled with something like bristles on the other. The inner surfaces were worn smooth from friction. At first she'd thought they might be a kind of root from a tree or shrub, but now she wasn't at all confident the material was wood. Recalling her glimpse of the landscape, she wouldn't have been surprised if no trees grew on the Regian planet. She hadn't seen any vegetation, and the sky had been thick with dark clouds. Perhaps she'd arrived here in the evening, but she had a feeling the place was always like that. On the Bathsheba, the aliens had set the lights to low levels, which must have been how they felt most comfortable. If their world didn't contain wood, then her efforts were hopeless. She would never make elixir, never cast for the king, and her family would be infested, whatever that meant. She would probably be infested too. She put down the pieces of material and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to retain the remaining warmth in her body. She sniffed as thin mucus threatened to drip from her nose. If she couldn't cast, perhaps there was another answer to her predicament. She mentally went over what she knew. When the bag had been taken off her head, the first sight to greet her was a bloated creature that looked nothing like the other Regions. Its thick, segmented body lay on the floor of the chamber, about 2 meters wide and tall, and an unknown length, as she'd been unable to see the end of it. If the creature had legs, they were clearly not substantial enough to bear its weight. At one of its sides, Regions were collecting small egg-shaped objects the aliens seemed to be producing from somewhere in its large bulk. The chamber had been as dark as everywhere else, lit only by phosphorescent spots on the ceiling. The walls were sleek and dark, while the floor was soft and damp, like thick, deep leaf mold in an old forest. She'd been too terrified to speak at first, but as the silence surrounding her grew, she understood the aliens expected her to say something. If she said the wrong thing, she might immediately be hauled off to a Region kitchen. Bizarrely, the lessons in diplomacy and oratory she'd taken while growing up on Ithia came to the forefront of her mind. She stood up slowly, watching for signs from the Regions that her behavior was acceptable. When she was upright, she bowed. "My name is Parthenia. Alien, host, special alien creature, king. Perform illusion." She touched her earcom. The deluge of words was overwhelming. "Please, just one of you speak. I can't understand you." "King." "Aye, king. Alien." "King?" The creature looked the least like any king she might have imagined. She assumed the alien was her. She bowed again. "I am very pleased to meet you, king. Special illusion, creature power." "It is not an illusion, your majesty. I do have a special power, which I would be happy to offer in your service." Serving the king of the Regions was the last thing she wanted to do, but some dissembling could buy her the time and opportunity she needed to rescue the captives from the Bathsheba. "Power, show, ability, perform, alien." "I can't do it without elixir. If you will allow me to make the liquid I need, I will demonstrate my power." "Liquid bring power." "Yes, the liquid helps to give me my power." "Bring liquid, ability." A moment later, something poked her back. A Region was standing behind her, carrying a bowl filled with an opaque liquid that might have been water. "No, not water. I need elixir. Only I can make it. If you can give me..." She had told the creature everything she needed, but it appeared her requests would take some time to fulfill, because the Regions had removed her from her audience with the king and taken her to the pit. Along the way, she'd seen parts of the habitation. The aliens lived underground, which wasn't surprising considering the barren hostility of life on the surface. The tough, chitinous substance that comprised the walls and ceilings in the king's chamber was the material of choice for the low, windowless rooms that lined the passages. The creatures also seemed to favor the soft, dank floors everywhere she passed. Perhaps it was comfortable for their pincered feet. The end to her journey, when it had come, had been abrupt and unexpected. One moment she'd been walking down a dimly lit thoroughfare, flanked by 2 Regions, and the next, one of them had sharply shoved her, and she'd found herself falling down a near vertical slope. In the poor light conditions, she hadn't noticed the hole in the ground she'd been pushed into. She had a split second to fear the impact at the bottom before she hit it, though the soft landing and low gravity meant she was unhurt. After a few moments, her eyes adjusted to the even lower level of light, and she'd seen she was basically in a hole in the ground, about 3 meters wide. There was nothing for her to sit or lie on, no food and no water. The opening to the shaft she'd fallen down was beyond her reach, though the shaft itself was only a couple of meters long. Summing up her situation, it didn't look good. She wasn't ever going to be able to make elixir. Eventually the king's patience would run out, and her family would be infested. She had to try something else, and she had to act fast. Chapter 33. Atoy's words echoed in Carina's head. Easy for you to say, the Regians will keep you all alive. The rest of us will be dishes on the menu. Her friend was right, of course. The power she'd often considered as much of a disadvantage as a benefit, the ability that made mages a target for exploitation, could be the very thing to save her and her family. But the realization brought her little joy. The men and women of the Black Dogs had always been more than hired mercenaries to her. She had grown from a kid to a woman among them, and though they'd first fought for her because they were being paid, the lines of her relationship with them had since softened. They'd joined her on the epic journey across the galaxy. They were no longer employees, but companions. She couldn't allow them to come to harm on the Regians' planet. When she'd figured out a way to escape, she wouldn't be leaving unless she could bring every single merc with her. She slumped against the side of the box the aliens had confined her in. It was the most comfortable position she could find in the small cube. From the movement she'd felt, she guessed she'd arrived on their world, and it was only a matter of time until one side of the box fell open, and a cold, damp gust of air blew in. She shivered and peered out into the darkness. She'd expected something brighter than the pitch black of the box's interior, but if it hadn't been for the sound of the side falling and the fresh breeze, she wouldn't have known what had happened. She guessed it was nighttime and cloudy. Her body felt light, and she recalled the planet's low gravity. The lid of the box lifted, and the remaining sides collapsed. She shivered. The chill wind was almost a gale, and she couldn't see a thing. She could hear stuff, though. The familiar rustle of Regians' carapaces in contact with each other. Pincers plucked at her clothes, encouraging her to rise. "You can talk to me," she said. "I can understand you." Neither Lomang nor Mezban had thought to take the translator from her, either due to their stupidity or because they didn't think they would need it. She guessed they were regretting their omission now, or maybe not. Maybe it was better not to know how your captors planned to fricassee you. "No eyes, no see. Damn it! You want me to wear the stupid bag? Go ahead, put it back on me. I'm as good as blind right now anyway." Removing the bag had been the first thing she'd done after the creatures had forced her into the box. The Regians clearly didn't want her to see their ship or wherever they planned to take her. The small sack was thrust over her head, and the aliens began to prod her back. "Okay, I'm moving, see?" She shuffled forward, feeling with her toes for unevenness and obstacles. At the same time, she strained her ears, listening for sounds of the Regians' other captives, her family in particular. The kids would be terrified, though Parthenia would be able to provide some comfort and help to keep them safe. What would she do without her sister? She hoped she'd finally healed the rift between them. Suddenly the ground disappeared from beneath her feet and she plummeted. She screamed, but her cry was cut off as she hit a soft surface, falling quickly to her knees and then onto her side. Pincers poked her body. She heard a snip and her hands were free. Instantly, she ripped the bag from her head, just in time to see the door to her new confinement close. Here there was light and odour, a terrible odour. She jumped up and ran to the grid that separated her from her surroundings. The Regian who had cut through her wrist binding and closed her cage door was leaving. She could see no other aliens in the place, only humans. Clutching the wires in horror and dismay, her gaze roved the scene, her mind almost unable to take in what she was seeing. Hundreds of people lay on the ground, under a strange pale green light emitted by some kind of phosphorescent plant. The people were unclothed and lying face upward, alive but barely moving. The reason for their position was obvious. Each person had a pillow-shaped object fixed to their stomach. Strings of the hard oblong cases hung from the ceiling to the floor. The sight sparked a flashback. She had seen the strings before, in the Regian's viewing dome, when she and Parthenia had planted the bomb. What were they? Why had the Regians stuck the objects to the people's stomachs? She reached through the grid. "Hey!" she called to the nearest person, who lay only a few meters away. "Hey! Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes flickered and her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then Carina saw the source of the sickening stench. Only the people nearest to her were alive. Beyond them, in the center of the underground space, lay corpses. Blackened and rotting, some almost skeletal. They also carried the Regians' cases on their stomachs, though these cases had softened and collapsed. She dropped to her knees, and tears of dismay and pity filled her eyes. This was what happened to the people the Regians took from the poor settlements they raided. They didn't eat them. To be eaten would at least be a quick death, not this dreadful torture. In happier times, as a child, she had loved to study insects. She had found everything about them fascinating, what they ate, the homes they built, how they reproduced, and their life cycles. An idea of what was happening to the people forced its way into her stricken mind, and she turned to one side and vomited. A scream cut through the torment of her thoughts. The sound abruptly stopped, and she heard a dull, soft thump. Someone else had fallen into the chamber. She heard a child weeping. "Who's that? Is that you, Darius? Nala?" The sobs stopped.
"Carina,"
Oriana replied.
"you're here too. Oh, what's that dreadful smell?"
It was difficult to see in the dim light, but from the direction of her voice, Oriana appeared to be in a cell on the other side of the chamber. "I'm opposite you, I think. Oriana, do you have a bag over your head? If you do, don't take it off." What could she tell her sister as an explanation? She had to prevent her from seeing the heart-wrenching, dreadful spectacle of the Regians' other human captives.
"Huh?
Just don't take the bag off." Oriana began to hyperventilate. Carina could hear her great hoops of breath across the chamber.
"It's horrible, horrible,"
when she seemed to get over her shock a little.
"Carina, what's happening to those poor people?"
"I don't know," she replied, though she thought she did. "Try not to look at them. I don't think there's anything we can do to help them." Fern arrived next, and Carina went through the same process with her brother. When Darius and Nala were dropped into the chamber, she thought she might have better success at persuading them to leave their bags on, but she didn't. The youngest children also saw the horror. As far as she could tell, her brothers and sisters were confined at roughly equal distances around the circular space. To her right and left stood cells like hers, but empty. The Regians seemed to want to keep the mages as far apart as they could. Nala had been the last to arrive. After Carina had done her best to calm her little sister, she waited for the expected fifth sibling, but she didn't appear. Finally she asked, "When was the last time you saw Parthenia?" Oriana replied, "We haven't seen her for a long time. The soldiers took her right after they took you." "You don't know what happened to her?" "No," said Fern. "We all came here together, but not Parthenia. We don't know where she is." "Shit! Where was the oldest of her sisters?" Chapter 34. Parthenia's heart drummed against her breastbone as she contemplated her plan. Time was running out fast. The guard could come back at any minute, and if she was caught, the Regians would put her somewhere she had zero prospect of escape. She had to move, but her limbs seemed frozen. Hot blood generated by fear had driven out the intense chill that had invaded her body, and her skin was slick with sweat. "I'm going to do it," she murmured. "I will do it." Still, she remained motionless. "Now! I'm doing it now!" Somehow she forced her reluctant arm to reach out. She dug her fingers into the wall and pulled out a large chunk. Like the floor, the material was very soft and damp. She dropped the chunk and pulled out another handful with her other hand. Casting the stuff aside, she grabbed the edges of the hole and pulled them away, widening the gap. It had to be at least as wide as her. What would come next made her gasp with trepidation, but now she'd begun, she knew she wouldn't stop, not unless she died in her attempt. She ripped into the wall, yanking out thick pieces and creating a pile on the floor. When the hole was sufficiently wide and deep, she would stand on the pile to climb up into it. From then on, she only had to dig upward, all the way to the surface, dropping the humus below her. Within a minute, she'd made a deep excavation, and she was struggling to reach the top of it to pull out more material. She tried standing on the pile, but it squashed down nearly flat under her weight. Darn it! She jumped to reach further and succeeded in deepening the hole, but soon she was stymied again. It wasn't going to work. Not this way. She took a break, panting, as she tried to figure out a solution. Above her, the steady, dull light dimmed. She held her breath. Had the guard come back? But the light returned to its usual subdued level. It had only been something passing above, another Regian. What would she do if she was spotted after she escaped? She shook her head. She would have to work that out later. The tunnel was too perpendicular, she realized. She had to make it run at more of an angle. It meant more digging, which would take more time, but she had no choice. Thrusting her already sore hands into the wall, she began to tear at its lower surface, creating a deeper slope. As soon as there was room, she climbed inside and continued to extend the hole. Material built up behind her, which she thrust away with her feet. The thought of closing the opening to the pit horrified her, though she knew it would be inevitable. To keep her mind off the many grim scenarios that could result from her efforts, she thought about Carina and their siblings. She hoped they were all still okay and that she would find them soon after she escaped. When concern for her family also threatened her composure, she turned her mind to Camille. She had only just begun to get to know him, but she liked him a lot, and he seemed to really like her too. She had to escape. She had to reunite with her family and with the mercs. Together they would find a way to get off the planet. How long was the tunnel? Was she near the surface yet? Black, wet earth surrounded her and covered her from head to toe. She didn't dare look toward her feet in case the exit to the pit had closed up. She'd been steadily pushing away the dug material. Deep inside, she knew she must now be some way from the hole's entrance. She was like a grub, wriggling underground, trying to find the light. Was she even digging in the right direction any longer? She thought she was, but she could have turned without realizing. She had no way to confirm which way was up and which was down, and the low gravity didn't help. She felt like she was digging upward, but she could be mistaken. Grab, pull, push down past her body, grab another handful, kick her feet, drag herself forward with her elbows. The air was thick with moisture. Soil particles lined her mouth and nostrils and clogged her eyelids. Earth pressed in on her ribs and hips, and she had to force each breath, each onward movement. Where was Carina? Where were her brothers and sisters? Where was Camille? What wouldn't she give to see one of them right now? What would she not sacrifice for someone, anyone, to push a hand through the humus above her and pull her up and out? Where was Mother? She wanted that dear, sweet, kind, tortured, sad woman desperately. But she was gone, long ago and far away, and she would never see her again. Fear and grief forced its way up from her stomach into her throat, and she gave a great sob. Immediately she coughed, struggling to breathe in the scant air. She was nearing the end of her strength. If she didn't reach the surface soon, she would never make it. What a terrible way to go. The Regians would see what she had done, and maybe they would dig her out, and then... A spasm of revulsion passed through her, driving her out from her fog of despair. She realized she'd stopped moving, stopped digging. How long had she been lying here? She would not die this dreadful death, buried alive in a grave of her own making. She would not. With one last desperate effort, she plunged her hand into the earth and broke through into empty air. She'd paused in her digging only a short distance below the surface. Energy flooded into her. She pulled down the soil above, closing her eyes and spluttering in the deluge. Air moved on her face. For a moment she lay still, enjoying the simple ability to breathe freely. Caution overcame her elation, however. If she emerged from the hole in front of a Regian, all her hard work would be undone. She waited, listening for the telltale rustle of carapaces and for the aliens' voices over her comm. No sound broke the silence. Slowly she lifted her head and peered out into the passage. The chitinous walls dimly shone, reflecting the soft green glow from the ceiling. She seemed to be the only living thing in the immediate area. She pulled down more soil and then grabbed the edges of the hole before easing herself up and out. For the briefest moment she shook and wiped off the clinging earth. Then she ran, but before she'd gone far, she stopped and ran back. The hole she'd made gaped wide and obvious in the floor. She pulled in soil from the edges. If she'd dug a vertical tunnel, her efforts would have been useless, but she managed to somewhat fill the diagonally sloping space. She quickly patted the earth flat, and then she was up and on her way, heading in the opposite direction to the king's chamber. Chapter 35. "Don't worry," Carina said. "We'll get out of here somehow." She was trying to allay her siblings' fears, but her words sounded hollow even to herself. She'd thought their abilities would protect them from the worst the Regians could do to them, but the fact that the aliens had placed them in the same area as their other victims said otherwise. Why else would they have put them here if not to attach the cases to their stomachs and leave them to die slowly and horribly? She was almost certain what the cases contained. and what would happen to the bodies of the people who had already died. Certain insect species used other animals as hosts for their young, laying eggs inside the living bodies. When the eggs hatched, the larva would feed on the readily available meat, which would remain fresh for as long as the host survived. The cases were Region eggs. When they hatched, the embryo would burrow into the stomachs of the victims and slowly eat them from the inside out. The next stage in the growth cycle usually involved molting and then moving away to find other food sources. Among the rotting corpses were what looked like the shed carapaces of small regions, as well as some kind of fungal sprouting body. She guessed that, at an earlier point in the history of their species, the aliens had parasitized a native animal. But the original hosts had died out, and so the Regions had sought a replacement. Humans colonizing the sector had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that was that. The only thing that puzzled her was why the people weren't able to get up and move around. Insects employing that method of raising their young usually paralyze the host with a toxin, rendering them immobile without killing them. But the people in the room could move, albeit only slightly, and the movements appeared random. She couldn't see anything holding them down. At least they didn't appear to be in pain or fully conscious. They reminded her of brain trauma victims whose families couldn't afford the splicers' treatment fees, so they remained in bed, eating and sleeping, but not really awake. She turned her gaze from the appalling, pitiful sight and tried to see her brothers and sisters, but the place was too dark. None of them had answered her attempt at a reassuring comment. "Hey guys, did you hear me?" Her question drew short replies from each. They were still here, just too traumatized to speak. She wished the Regions had allowed them to be together. That would have been a small comfort, and she would have been better able to distract them from the ghastly spectacle. Even better, she thought, glancing up at the hole in the ceiling, I could have lifted them out of here. The distance she'd fallen hadn't seemed great. If Fern had stood on her shoulders, Darius, Nala, and Oriana might have been able to climb out of the hole, and Oriana could then pull Fern up. Here they weighed about half their regular weight. Not that it would have done anyone much good. They wouldn't have lived long on that cold, dark planet, but perhaps it would have been a better fate than the one that now awaited them. A thunk broke the silence. Someone had landed in the cell next door. "Parthenia? I'm not your sister," a surly male voice replied. "Have you seen her? Do you know where she is?" "No idea. Looks like I've got worse things to worry about than you being separated from the brats." She knew she'd heard him before, but she couldn't put a face to the memory. "You are one of the black dogs, right?" "Yeah, and you're the bitch who got me into this mess." His tone and attitude helped her make the connection. It was the merc who had tried it on with Parthenia, the scarred man whose behavior constantly bordered on insubordination. Chandu. "That's rich," she spat back, in no mood to tolerate his insult. "You made the choice to stay with the band. Cadwallader paid off everyone who wanted to leave, and spend the rest of my life hiding out from the Dirksons. Some choice." He wasn't easily identifiable like Cadwallader. A few well-told lies would have secured his safety. But she couldn't be bothered to argue. A dreadful sound emerged from the quiet, the rustle of approaching Regions. Several of them, from the sound of it. A few moments later they appeared, 4, walking rapidly in her direction. Her pulse quickened. Were they coming for her? Were they about to stick an egg case to her stomach and do whatever it was they did to make people vegetative? She shrank against the far wall of her cell, her courage entirely failing her. And yet it was better they did it to her than one of the kids. She could only hope her siblings didn't see what became of her. But the Regians passed her cell and stopped at Chandu's. "What do you want with me, you?" He let out a string of colourful expletives. One of the aliens opened the grid. "Get away! Leave me alone! What are you doing? What the hell's that?" He darted from his cell and into the sea of human bodies. The Regians set off in pursuit, their long legs stepping easily over the prone figures. Chandu tripped and fell, landing face first among the corpses. He must have hit one of the mushrooms too, because a cloud of spores rose into the air. He screamed in horror and despair as the aliens caught up to him. The sight of the spreading cloud of particles from the fungus sparked an idea. She might have the explanation for the near comatose state of the human hosts. "Kids, try not to breathe in any of the cloud in the centre there. Can you see it?" Chandu's unhappy accident was many meters distant from the cells, and the chance of inhaling the spores was remote. 3 of the Regians held Chandu down, one on each leg and the third pressing on his shoulders. He flailed, but the creatures were too strong for him. The 4th alien held a device in his front pincers, a cubic box from which a tube protruded, widening at its end. The Regian lowered the device in front of Chandu's face. "Stop! No!" he hollered, twisting his head vigorously from side to side. "No!" A pause, then, "Ah! What did you do? What have you done to me?" He coughed deeply. "Ah! What have you done?" The alien stepped back, releasing him. But Chandu didn't attempt to run away. He turned onto all fours and coughed again, so strongly he sounded about to cough up his lungs. "What was that stuff? What did you—" He collapsed. His arms and legs moved briefly, then they were still. The Regians moved in again and delicately removed his clothes. Next, one of them plucked an egg from the nearest string and pressed it onto his stomach. Their work done, the aliens left him and walked away, high-stepping through the grisly carpet. They were gone, and all was still again. She expected some kind of response from the children to what they'd seen, expressions of their feelings or attempts to seek reassurance. But nothing came. Her siblings were simply too horrified to speak. Another thunk sounded in Carina's neighbouring cell, making her jump. A second host for the Regians' young had arrived. She prayed it was not Bryce or Jace. If she survived this ordeal, how could she live with the memory of either of them undergoing the same experience as Chandu? It would be an endless torment. A groan and cursing emanated from the cell. Terror exploded in her heart as she recognized the voice. "Is that you?" Chapter 36. The cold had seeped into Parthenia's bones again. She crouched, hugging herself, near the corner of a small passage that led from the main thoroughfare. At first she'd been terrified the Regians might smell her while she waited to catch her breath. She had heard many species' sense of smell was far superior to humans, and they used it in the way people used their sight and hearing. But either the aliens' olfactory capabilities weren't great, or the soil coating her body was masking her scent. Several Regians had passed by while she'd been resting. They carried things in their front pincers while walking on their remaining 4 limbs. The light was too dim to see what they were carrying, but she had the impression the objects were regular household things, and she was in some kind of residential area, not a military or government place. It seemed odd that the king lived so close to the common citizens, and she hadn't noticed anything grand or decorative about his chamber. Perhaps the Regian society was very egalitarian, or their culture didn't value external displays of wealth or power. Another Regian oddity struck her. They carried no weapons. They fought using the acid they produced naturally. She had to admit the strategy was effective against humans wearing no armor. Yet it was strange that a spacefaring species hadn't invented military technology. Unless they had, but it couldn't be used at close quarters. She shivered, wondering what to do next. Trying to understand the creatures who had captured her didn't seem to be helping her figure out how to escape. One thing she knew for sure, she had to get out of that place somehow. It wouldn't be long before her guard returned to her pit and saw she was missing. She wouldn't be able to go far on foot, and the Regians would know all they had to do to recapture her was to search. They certainly had the numbers to cover a wide area quickly. If she could leave the metropolis, she might stand a chance. She might even discover where the aliens were keeping her family and the black dogs. If she could release them, that would really be something. The way things were at the moment, she would be content just to see a familiar face. Deciding she'd rested enough and was only going to get even colder, she peeked out from her hiding place and immediately drew her head in again. A Regian was approaching. It was impossible to hear them on the soft humus floors. She pressed her back against the hard, smooth wall and held her breath. The creature stopped directly outside the little alley. She froze, but not before shrinking her eyes to slits. The white in them would stand out against her besmirched skin and hair. The Regian turned away and she relaxed a notch. It was doing something at the opposite wall. A section rose, revealing many tiny steps leading up. The Regian walked through the opening and the section descended again. When it closed, it blended so well with the rest of the wall it was impossible to see. Could this be an exit to the outside? The steps might only lead up to the next level, but she would be nearer her goal. After checking no other aliens were approaching, she slipped from the alley and crossed to the wall. How had the creature opened the exit? She hadn't noticed it carrying anything like a key or security device. She scanned the surface. At the height of her shoulders, about the level of the top of the Regian's limbs, was a small hole. She bent down and looked in, but it was impossible to see anything. The dim light didn't penetrate. Her heart beat faster. The obvious thing to do was to put a finger in, but she feared something might cut it or bite it off. Swallowing, she lifted her left, non-dominant hand and poked her index finger into the hole, touching a sloping surface. A switch? She pressed. Click! The section rose. She darted in and up the many narrow steps. As she ran, she realized it was edges like these she'd stumbled and cut her knees on when the Regians had brought her here. Not at all suited to human feet, they were perfect for the alien slim pincers. The stairs continued for about 10 meters and ended with another section of wall. She quickly located the hole holding the switch and pressed it. Beyond the open doorway stretched the desolate surface of the Regian's planet. An icy wind cut straight to her skin. She stepped out. Groups of large and small rocks peppered the landscape. She sped toward the nearest group, which was sufficiently large to hide her. She leapt over a rock and then hunkered down. Looking back the way she'd come, she saw a low hill with the door to the lower level set in the side. The door had closed, and the Region she'd seen go up the stairs was nowhere in sight. It was night time, but it wasn't too dark to see the barren area clearly. The heavy cloud she'd seen earlier had gone, and 3 moons shone down, one large and 2 smaller flanking it. Where had the alien gone? She couldn't see any other entrances to the habitation. The creature couldn't have disappeared. It must have been going somewhere. Perhaps it had been on its way to the place where her family and the others had been confined. She stood up and peered in the other direction. Moonlight illuminated every rock and pebble of the dusty surface. The horizon seemed close, though it was hard to get a sense of perspective in the unfamiliar scenery. She caught her breath. Only a few meters away stood a group of 5 Regions. Their black carapaces were the perfect camouflage in the deep shadows cast from the 3 moons' beams. One of them had moved a little, attracting her attention. They faced the same direction, as if waiting for something or someone to arrive. Standing up had brought her out of the shelter of the rocks, exposing her to the biting wind. She shook with cold, and her teeth chattered. Ducking down again, she knew she was nearing the limits of her body's endurance. But returning to the comparative warmth underground was out of the question. Better to die out here, free from captivity. She only wished she could see her siblings and Camille again. She risked another peek over the rocks. The aliens remained in the same position. What could they be waiting for? No entrances stood nearby except the one she'd exited, and she couldn't see any roads or buildings. Once more the freezing breeze got the better of her, and she sank into the lee of the rocks. The wind soughed and whined as it rushed past. She jammed her frozen fingers into her armpits and tried to listen beyond its noise. She looked up at the 3 moons and unfamiliar starscape. How far was this planet from Ithia? She had no idea. The gilded prison that had once been her home seemed distant and dreamlike. Despite the presence of her demonic father, she had had many happy times there, playing with her brothers and sisters and enjoying the quiet, comforting love of their mother, which persisted throughout father's moods and tirades. She recalled the warm, verdant garden that surrounded the mansion, full of fruits and flowers. Sometimes she'd simply sat with mother in the sun, not speaking, just soaking up the pleasant warmth. She could almost feel the sun's warmth right now, and the drowsiness that came with it. It felt wonderful. She wanted to slip into sleep, warm and secure. Whoomph! The noise jerked her awake, and a tremor ran through the ground. Why did she feel so hot when before she'd been so cold? And what had made that noise? Fighting exhaustion, she rose to her feet again and looked out. Something was here that hadn't been here before. Something huge. Its shape reminded her of seashells father had once brought home, curved on one side and flat on the other. But this thing was many times larger. The tallest part stood 30 times higher than any Region, and it was the same width. The flat section rested on the ground, and a vertical surface rose from the base to the top. The thing had landed, causing the sound and vibration. The size and appearance of the object would have led her to conclude it was some kind of airplane or starship, except the thing was alive. The tips at the edges of its body moved, rippling like the fins of a flat fish, and the surface at what seemed to be its front looked soft, like skin. The Regions walked toward the creature. As they got near, an opening appeared, drawing back its edges like curtains or lips around a mouth. She watched while the Regions went inside. The opening was a pitch-black hole, giving no clue as to what was happening. Time passed, though she didn't know how much. It could have been seconds or minutes. All she knew was she had to see what was going on. What was that thing? She was at the end of her endurance. It was her only hope of survival. Finally, the Regions emerged, and between them walked two men. She squinted to make out their faces. She didn't recognize either of them, which probably meant they were Mezban's soldiers. And if they were Mezban's troops, that meant the thing had brought them here from the Bathsheba. An animal that flew through space? She had heard of such creatures, but none the size of a starship, and none which also carried passengers. But she didn't have the luxury of contemplating the revelation right now. Excitement coursed through her. If she watched where the men were taken, that might tell her where her family and the black dogs were being held too. The Regions poked the soldiers with their pincers to direct them, the same way they'd poked her, though she noticed the men weren't wearing bags over their heads. What that meant, she didn't know. The group walked around the huge flying creature and disappeared. She started out from her hiding place, somewhat fearful of the living starship perceiving her and raising an alarm, but it didn't appear to react as she approached. She followed the same path as the aliens and their captives, around the right-hand fin or wing. As soon as she rounded the tip, she saw them again. The Regions were poking the men vigorously, urging them forward, but they were resisting. Suddenly, one of the aliens gave a man a particularly hard shove, and he dropped down out of sight. A beat later, the same thing happened to the other man. The soldiers had fallen so quickly, it was clear they'd been pushed into holes. Was that what had happened to her family? She needed to get closer to find out, but the Regions were returning. She spun around, looking for a place to hide. There was nothing. No group of boulders in this area was large enough to conceal her. Her only chance was to return the way she'd come. But the aliens had already spotted her. They were loping in her direction, covering the ground fast on their lengthy limbs. She fled. Weighing much less than her usual weight, running should have been easy, but she had no energy left. Her legs moved as if trying to wade through treacle. She fell. A second later, a Region loomed over her. "No!" she yelled. "No! Don't take me back! I won't go! I want to see my family! I want to be with them!" She scrabbled backward on all fours, trying but failing to rise. A hole opened in the front of the alien's carapace and liquid spurted out. Acid splashed across her exposed skin. She shrieked. Chapter 37. Carina lay on her side, unable to move, unable to think. Atoy was gone. Her friend was as good as dead, and her last conscious moments had been filled with terror, knowing her sickening fate. Right now, somewhere out there among the parasitized bodies, some dead and some still living, lay the person she'd known since she'd first boarded the Duchess as a 16-year-old street rat. They'd trained, fought and parted together, and though neither had ever put it into words, they'd liked and trusted each other. After Atoy had landed in the cell next door, she had quickly taken in and understood the situation. Carina hadn't had to do much explaining. It didn't take a genius to figure out what the Regions intended to do. Except maybe not to the mages. Chandu had been inoculated with the fungal spores as soon as he had arrived. She was confident that was what the aliens had sprayed into the man's face. As well as several insects that lay eggs in hosts' bodies, she had also come across creatures who behaved as if in a trance, wandering around in the open aimlessly, or climbing to the tops of plants and remaining exposed, as if inviting a predator to eat them. The insects that exhibited this strange behaviour all had one thing in common, a tiny protuberance on their heads like a small mushroom. They had clearly been infested by a fungus, and it affected their behaviour. When she'd seen the puff of spores from the fungal body Chandu crushed, she had understood the reason for the lack of animation in the people who remained alive. The Regians squirted something up Chandu's nose and into his mouth, confirming her theory. The spores had quickly infiltrated the man's brain and affected his motor functions. She only hoped, nasty though Chandu was, that his mind was not awake and functioning normally, trapped in an unresponsive body. But the Regians hadn't done the same thing to the mages, yet. She supposed the aliens hoped she and her siblings might be more useful to them than only as fresh meat. The same was not true for Atoy. The accusation she'd thrown at Carina as the Peregrine towed the Duchess back to the colony ship had proven true. The mages were to be spared, for now, but the mercs were not to be granted the same clemency. It would have been better for her friend if they had activated the self-destruct, and it was a sign of their friendship that she had not. Atoy had paid the price.
Yeah, it's me, she had answered Carina. That you, Car? What the freaking stars is going on in here?
Before Carina answered, she'd added,
Or maybe I don't want to know. Fuck! What happened to Chandu? I saw them bring him here ahead of me.
He's out there. Atoy was silent. Carina could hear her friend's breaths, heavy and speeding up, in the stillness.
Guess they'll be coming for me soon.
Carina couldn't answer her.
You know what I said, on the Duchess, about you mages and us mercs?
Uh-huh.
I didn't mean it. Forget about it.
But you were...
Forget it, okay?
Okay, Carina replied, though she never would. Atoy stood up and gripped the cage wires.
And keep working out, right? You're weak. You can be stronger. And you need to be to protect those brats.
You know, the Regians came for Chandu faster than this. Maybe...
4 aliens appeared from the shadows and strode toward Atoy's cell.
Her friend muttered expletives, then she said,
Car, promise me something.
Anything.
Make it worth it. Live a good life. A long life. For me.
The sobs choking Carina stole her reply. The Regians opened Atoy's cell door. She put up a hell of a fight, breaking 2 of the aliens' legs and nearly making it to the exit before they caught her and subdued her. Atoy lay somewhere out there, not yet dead, but not quite living, and Carina would never be the same again. Since then, more black dogs had arrived, but the aliens seemed to be leaving them alone for now. The men and women filled most of the cells around the perimeter of the hatching chamber. Carina had broken the news about Atoy and Chandu to them. Hearing the fate of their captain distressed and saddened the mercs, but Chandu's death went unremarked. Even if she had elixir, a heal cast wouldn't fix what had happened to Atoy. It couldn't drive the spores from her body, and they were far too small to transport. Even now, the Regian egg would be burrowing into her guts, taking up residence, sucking out her life force. At first, Carina had discussed escape strategies with the mercs, but no one had come up with anything concrete. Now the noise in the place was minimal. Each of them kept their thoughts to themselves, though she thought she could hear murmurings that could be prayers. The noise barely penetrated her misery. Someone new arrived, and there was the silence as the new arrival took in the shocking sight before them. Then a voice called out,
Carina, are you here?
Bryce! She sat up. I'm here! She could just see him, looking out from a cell a few meters away.
And the kids?
We're here too, Fern replied. though we don't know where Parthenia is.
Are you all okay?
Yes, Oriana replied sadly. We're fine. Atoy's dead, said Carina. The Regians took her, out there.
Shit. I'm sorry.
Carina couldn't respond.
There has to be a way out of this.
I'm all ears, one of the mercs growled. We haven't any elixir, said Oriana. If we had just a little, a mouthful, maybe we could do something. But we don't, said Fern. So there's no point wishing. Another thunk, another awful silence, each person in the room knowing what the new person was going through. Carina watched the place the Regians had come from before. The cells were nearly full. How long would the aliens wait before returning to select the next host? In some ways it might be better to be chosen soon, if the only alternative was to sit and see what would become of you. If the Regians decided the mages were of no use to them, they would probably be the last to be chosen. Carina wasn't sure they were any better off. Someone cleared their throat, a deep male cough.
Carina Lin, are you in here?
She sighed. Yes, Jace, I'm here.
Good. And the rest of your family?
We're missing Parthenia, Fern replied.
Ah, that's unfortunate.
Is it? Carina asked. I was hoping she was in a better place than this.
Yes it is. It means we'll have to find her.
I'd love to find her, but I have no idea how. A pause.
Is this place under surveillance by the aliens?
I don't think so.
I have something for you. For us, but I'm not sure if it's safe to talk about it.
Something for me? She stood up and peered across the room, trying to see the older mage. His large figure was easy to spot.
Yes, something very useful, though not much of it.
Something? Carina's legs became weak, and she grasped the wires for support. You're kidding me!
I'm not joking. Perhaps I shouldn't say any more. Now we understand each other.
The Regians didn't know Jace was a mage. Lomang and Mezban hadn't told them, and because none of the mercs had been wearing armour, he'd been mistaken for one of them. After the Duchess was seized, the Black Dog's weapons had been collected, but no one had seen any reason to take away a soldier's canteen. Jace was carrying elixir. Chapter 38. The sound of the cell doors unlocking was like the stridulation of insects on a still night. The unlock cast required little effort, and Jace could accomplish it with only one mouthful of the precious fluid. If their supply of elixir had been plentiful, they might have transported all the mercs out of the hatching chamber. But it wasn't, and even if it was, where should the mercs go? No one knew of a safe place on the Regian planet. Now they were free, the Black Dogs moved into action. One ran into his neighbour's cell and called for another's help. The three men quickly formed a tower in the hole that led to the surface, and the topmost man looked out. Immediately he dropped to the floor and said in a loud whisper, "Regians, coming this way." Carina swore. "Quick, back to your cells, everyone. If they come in here, I'll split them." But the aliens didn't enter the chamber. Instead, new victims dropped into empty cells. 2 of Mezban's soldiers. What their arrival meant was unclear, but a quick decision had to be made. While the men were boggling at the sight of the dead and dying human hosts, one of the mercs sped over to them and demanded to know where their loyalty lay. Would they forsake Mezban and come over to the mercenary band? Unsurprisingly, the soldiers agreed, giving loud assurances of their new fealty. "Let's go," said Carina, as loudly as she dared. As she ran to reunite with Bryce and gather her brothers and sisters, The black dogs began to form towers as the original 3 had. The first men and women climbed up and out. Carina quickly stepped through the dreadful blanket of human hosts. When she reached Atoy, she stopped. Her friend's eyes were open, though unfocused, and her chest slowly rose and fell. The swollen egg case covered more than half her torso. Carina saw movement through the translucent shell. Something wriggling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling down. Her heart and throat aching like they were about to burst, she gently took her friend's head in both hands and then twisted sharply. A crack of breaking bone sounded, and Atoy's neck hung loose. The rising and falling of her chest stopped, and her eyes closed. For a moment, Carina couldn't see. Her tears dripped onto her old friend's face. "Goodbye," she murmured. "Thanks for all you did, all you were." A scream from outside pierced the air. "That's Parthenia!" Carina yelled. She ran out from the hosts and over to Jace, grabbing the elixir from him before speeding on to the nearest tower of mercs. "Help me up!" She pushed the canteen down her shirt. The waiting mercs parted, and the man at the bottom of the tower formed a stirrup with his hands. She put her foot on it. He boosted her upward, and the next man grabbed her wrists, lifting her higher. In another second, she was pulling herself out of the hole and onto the cold, dusty surface. Blinking in the bright moonlight, she swiveled, scanning the landscape. The first thing she saw was the slope of a small, dark hill. Except it wasn't a hill, unless hills moved. The lower reaches of the slope were undulating. She seemed to be looking at a living creature. Then she saw the Regions. 5 of them were gathered around something on the ground. Another scream rent the atmosphere. Her hand shook as she pulled the canteen out from her shirt and unscrewed the lid. She steadied her breath, took a drink, and closed her eyes. Achieving the calmness of mind required to cast was hard, but failing wasn't an option. She opened her eyes. The 5 Regions briefly shrieked before they were torn in two and their bodies evaporated into the ether. She raced to her sister, hoping the alien's death throes hadn't been heard by others of their kind. Parthenia was a ball of grime and burned flesh, curled up on her side. "I've got you!" She sipped elixir again and quickly cast heal. While she watched fresh skin grow over Parthenia's wounds, some mercs arrived. "We're bringing the rest of your family." The tension in Parthenia's body faded, and she sat up. "Thank you. Thank the stars you're okay," Carina replied, rubbing the wetness from her eyes. More mercs were running up, followed by Jace, Fern, and Darius. "Where are Oriana and Nala?"
"They're coming with Bryce," Jace replied. "But we need to transport the last of the soldiers up. They can't get out by themselves." She shook the canteen. Very little elixir remained, but leaving anyone behind was out of the question. She handed it to Jace, who took it and left. "Now what?" Fern asked. She was distracted from answering by the look in Darius's eyes. The boy's expression was tortured. Of all the experiences her brother had endured, she doubted he would ever recover from this one. "We could try to steal the Region ship," Parthenia said. "That would be ideal," said Carina, "if we knew where they kept them." "It's right there." Parthenia pointed at the hillock. Carina turned to take in the sight of the massive animal again. "That's a starship? Are you feeling all right? I heard it land, and I saw the Regions bring 2 of Mezban's soldiers out of it. Was that why the aliens had put bags over their heads? To prevent the mages from seeing how they travelled between the stars?
Their precaution was certainly justified. An organic, living space vessel could have many advantages. Then we'll try, Carina said. Jace was returning with the remaining mercs, and in the meantime, Oriana and Nala had also arrived with Bryce. She quickly explained what was proposed, and then they set off at a run with Parthenia, who took them to the entrance of the vessel. A tall facade rose to a narrow overhang. "That's the opening," said Parthenia, indicating a cleft at the base. "Gross," Fern exclaimed. "It's like lips." He prodded the surface. "Feels like skin." "Should we cast open?" asked Oriana. But as she spoke, the aperture parted. "Quick, inside," Carina urged. A hefty merc held her back, then nodded at a couple of the others. The two soldiers ran in, followed by the man who'd made her wait. He re-emerged. "All clear." "Regions!" someone shouted. The aliens were pouring from a doorway a short distance away. "Should we split them?" asked Fern. "Not if we can avoid it," Carina replied, hoping to conserve the vital elixir. Mercs were running into the living starship. A couple had picked up Darius and Nala and were carrying them. Fern and Oriana also disappeared into the opening.
"Come on,"
said Jace, tugging on her arm. "Just a minute, I have to—"
"What?"
Her heart was torn. The remaining elixir could make all the difference, and yet she couldn't leave the Region planet without doing one last thing. She took a drink.
"What are you doing?"
Jace demanded. She closed her eyes and cast. When she opened them again, the Regions were nearly upon them, and Jace was standing at the entrance to the starship, beckoning her urgently. She looked toward the holes in the ground leading to the hatching chamber. Flames were already licking from them. Chapter 39. As Carina stepped onto the Region starship, Oriana took the elixir from her and cast lock on the door, and Darius seemed to be in agony. The little boy was writhing on the deck. "It hurts! It hurts! It hurts!" Fern and Jace were kneeling at his side, but they didn't seem able to help him. "What's wrong?" Carina asked, crouching down. "What's wrong, sweetheart?"
"He doesn't appear to have any injuries," said Jace.
"Darius," said Fern, placing a hand on his brother's forehead. "What hurts?" "Should I cast heal on him anyway?" asked Parthenia. "Maybe, but—" Carina had a feeling there was another explanation for Darius's state. "Where's the pain coming from? Is it from somewhere on your body, or—"
"No, not me. The animal hurts bad."
A merc ran up, emerging from the ship's interior.
"We're screwed. We can't find the flight controls."
Carina cursed. Stealing an alien ship had always been a long shot. Now it looked like they were out of chances. Darius sat up, sweating and gasping, his eyes wide. He clasped Carina's arm.
"You have to help it! You have to help the animal!"
There was only one animal around here she knew about. "The ship? Is that the animal you mean?" Her brother dug his fingers into her flesh.
"You have to take off the tie! It hurts so much!"
A faint drumming could be heard from outside. The Regions were trying to get in. The lock cast would hold for a while, but not forever. And she was worried the aliens would spray acid on the starship creature. "What tie? Do you know where it is?" It was a long shot, but perhaps fixing the starship's problem might help them with their plight. It certainly couldn't do them any harm.
"Uh-huh,"
Darius nodded, grimacing. She helped him stand, and then supported him as he set off into the opening that yawned beyond the wide entrance. Her brother walked like he was carrying the weight of an entire planet on his shoulders, wincing and letting out small groans. He hobbled down a passage that resembled a throat, slim supporting ribs underlying the translucent, pale green skin of the walls, and a ceiling that curved over them. A hole appeared.
"Down there,"
said Darius.
"It's down there."
The tunnel that led from the hole sloped steeply. If they went down it, she wasn't sure how they would get up again. They would have to transport, and that would take the last of the elixir. Still, there seemed nothing else to do, and perhaps the flight controls were down there. "Okay, come here." She sat on the edge of the hole and pulled her brother onto her lap. Then she pushed off with one hand, and they slid down the strange facsimile of something from a children's playground. The Regians had embedded their phosphorescent plant on the ceiling, unless it grew there naturally, which Carina doubted. The illumination lit their way as they smoothly descended. If Darius hadn't been in pain, and they hadn't been in dire danger of recapture by the Regians, it might have been fun. They hit the bottom.
"Ow, ow, ow!"
Darius yelled, though it couldn't have been due to the mild impact. They were inside a roughly round room. The skin of its walls stretched over supporting ribs as it had been in the passage and tunnel. Structures protruding from the walls slotted together like pieces of a 3D puzzle.
"Is the tie here?" "Yeah, it's here. There it is."
He ran a few steps to one of the structures and grabbed at something frantically. "Let me see," said Carina, joining him. Darius moved a little to one side, but his small hands didn't leave the thing he was clasping. It was a binding of a tough, flexible material, tied tightly around a piece of the starship's tissue that bent like an elbow. Her brother was plucking uselessly at the ligature. "Darius, you have to move out of the way so I can try to untie it." He let go and stepped back, wringing his hands. She squatted down and examined the binding from above and then below. When she looked at the underside, it was clear to see the material had simply been twisted tightly and knotted. She worked her fingers into the knot and pulled it apart, and then she quickly untwisted the tie until it hung loose.
"Oh,"
said Darius, flopping to the floor.
"That's better."
"It stopped hurting now?"
"Yeah."
He put his head in his hands.
"That hurts so much."
"I thought it was only emotions you felt."
"I do, but when people are in pain, they get upset too."
The deck lurched. She gripped one of the structures to keep her balance, but the movement was too great. She landed next to her brother.
"What was that?"
"I was hoping you could tell me." The starship lurched again, and then came the distinct feeling they were rising.
"Are we going up?"
"I think so." "Are we? How does the starship feel?"
"It's happy now. Much happier. I think it's flying."
The deck lifted and turned, sending them barreling into a corner. Then it turned again, sending them in the opposite direction. Darius squealed and then giggled. The sensation of rising continued. There could be no doubt they were flying. Removing the creature's binding seemed to have released it from the Regian's control, and now it was escaping, taking its occupants with it.
"Carina!"
called a voice from the other end of the tunnel.
"That's Fern,"
said Darius. "I know." She went to the opening. "We're down here." A moment later, Fern's voice came echoing down, louder. "There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. Do you know we took off from the planet?" "Yes, we realized. Well, we found the rest of Mezban's soldiers. They were corralled together in a big room. Are Lomang and Mezban with them?" "Uh-huh. And the big guy. But their soldiers are really angry with them. The two who swore allegiance to the black dogs are talking to them. They figured out they could have gotten away from the Regians if Mezban and Lomang hadn't taken them back to the Bathsheba. Things are getting a bit hot in there. Honestly, that sounds like good news to me, Carina replied. If Mezban's troops dealt with her, her husband, and her husband's brother, it meant she wouldn't have to. She was too tired for revenge. How are you two going to get out of there? Fern asked. I'm not sure. Should I ask Jace to transport you? No, it's a waste of elixir. We need to save it for an emergency. Well, I'll see if I can find a rope or something. Thanks. No problem. Fern paused, then said, Do you know where the starship's taking us? Nope, I have no idea. Okay, I just thought I would ask. Chapter 40. They were heading for a moon. Bryce wrapped his arm around Carina. They were sitting behind a transparent shield covering one of the starship's 4 openings to space. The openings appeared to be part of the creature's visual organs. Sensitive sprays of tissue stood behind each shield, but there was also enough space to accommodate 2 people, and the creature didn't seem bothered by them. She rested her head on Bryce's shoulder. The Regian planet's 3 moons floated serenely in a sea of star-speckled ink. They were growing slowly larger, and there was no longer any doubt they were the starship's destination. The central, largest one seemed the likeliest target. Bryce gently squeezed her. How are you feeling? She sighed. I miss Atoy. We all do. She was tough, but she was well liked. She was... what to say? Atoy had been her bunkmate, her friend, and her saviour on more than one occasion when they'd worked together as mercs. Cadwallader's death had been hard, but Carina hadn't shared the same instinctive understanding with him as she had with her old friend. Atoy would have a place in her heart forever. She was... Bryce prompted. I can't talk about her yet. She sighed again. We need to figure out what to do when we reach that moon. Do you think the starship's gonna land and eject us? Who knows? But I don't think so. I think she carries other creatures around in a kind of symbiotic relationship. She gets some benefit from our presence, though I haven't figured out what it is, and her passengers get to travel into space. The Regians probably hitched rides on them for millennia until one day they discovered a way to control them and force them to go to destinations of their choosing. She? Bryce asked. All starships are female. You should know that by now. Okay, we need to persuade her to take us to the Bathsheba. Yeah, but how? My fear is she's attracted to the light of the moon, and when she gets there, she'll be attracted to the light of the Regian planet and fly right back. I hope not. Me too. But at least we'll be prepared this time. We might not have any weapons or armors or elixir, but... Her words petered out. The kids had searched the ship, but they'd found nothing. You're not filling me with optimism here. She sighed again and settled her head a little more. Bryce, I want to take back what I said that time in the Twilight Dome. I kind of thought you did. I was cut up about the mess of pain I seem to cause the people I love. I don't want to hurt you. I know. I understood where you were coming from, and I knew there wasn't anything I could say to change your mind, so I left it. I didn't sweat it because I knew you would be back one day. What made you think that? I'm just too irresistible. She snorted and laughed before pushing him away. He held out his arms and she settled into them again. Cadwallader told me once I should hold on to what I have, and I'm going to do that. Life's too short. Live a good life, a long life, for me, Atoy had said. If only it were that simple, but she would try, starting with not rejecting the people who meant so much to her. They had been underway for an hour or longer. Carina was warm and her family was finally safe, for the time being anyway. Mental and emotional exhaustion began to hit, and she felt her eyes closing as her mind retreated to the haven of sleep. Then the starship abruptly veered up and left, accelerating fast. Whoa! She tried to steady herself. What the hell? Shouts and cries of shock and fear echoed through the ship. Bryce got up and leaned out of the small recess, trying to see what was happening. The ship continued to pile on speed. Maybe the Regians are on our tail. They might have more of these spacefaring creatures. This one might be trying to get away. She listened to the yelling, but she couldn't make out what it was about. Saying he would go and investigate, Bryce stepped out and disappeared. While he was gone, the starship's flight gradually evened out, and the creature slowed to her previous speed. Several minutes later, Bryce returned. He leaned in at the opening, looking pale and shaken.
Lomang, Mezban, and some other passengers have gone.
What?
Some of the people on board aren't here anymore. One minute they were here, and the next, empty space. It happened a split second before the ship switched course.
Huh? Fear clutched her heart. What about the kids?
They're okay. They're all still aboard, and Jace's too. Xiao took a head count of the mercs. Lomang, Mezban, 6 of the black dogs, and roughly the same number of Mezban's ex-soldiers have vanished. Papu's still here, but he's in a state of shock.
He climbed in and sat down. What was going on? What if the same thing happened again? What could they do to stop it?
Do you think the starship made them disappear?
But how? I guess it's possible. Lots of things seem to happen around these parts that you don't see elsewhere. Then she recalled the weird, anomalous readings she'd seen on the Duchess's scan data while they'd been trying to escape from the Regians. The ship's computer hadn't been able to interpret information on an area of space near the Regian planet, which could only mean something about it didn't conform with known laws of physics. The answer hit her. Oh, wow! The Regians' odd ability to time-shift, the strange composition of their bodies, the way they disappeared when they died, it all made sense. I think the missing people might have moved out of sync with time, or they were moved by something. Imagine if, while you were aboard a vessel travelling at high speed, you suddenly stopped moving forward in time, or you moved ahead a fraction of a second. As soon as you re-entered normal time, the ship wouldn't be in the same place anymore.
Moved out of sync with time? What are you talking about?
She explained her theory, adding, the starship knows about the anomaly. She felt it approach, and she flew out of its path, but not fast enough to save everyone.
So the Regians evolved their ability to time shift due to this anomaly in space periodically drifting across their planet?
Exactly.
But wouldn't this ship also be affected by the time shift? Why did the anomaly shift the passengers but not the ship?
My guess is she can shift with it, and somehow she knows we can't. Bryce was silent. Eventually he said,
I sure hope the ship detects the anomaly earlier next time.
Me too. Those poor men and women. She leaned against him again, trying to savour the moment, not knowing if it might be their last. But the minutes crept by and nothing happened. The living starship swept through space, smoothly and sedately. It seemed like they were out of danger for now. However, they still had no clue what to do when they reached the moon. They couldn't leave the ship, that was for sure, not on an airless satellite. So if she decided to fly back to the planet, they would have to go with her. And then what would happen? As Carina was ruminating on their predicament, Oriana's head popped up above the edge of the opening to the recess.
I have an idea.
Cool. What is it?
It's an idea about how we can get back to the Bathsheba.
Even cooler, said Bryce.
But it'll use up the last of the elixir. Jace says there's only enough for one more cast, and I don't know if my idea will work.
There's only one way we can find out. Let's hear it.
We know the starship's alive, right? Darius could feel her pain. She thinks and she feels. And I think she must make decisions about where she goes and what she does. She has a mind. That means we, as mages, might be able to control her.
Carina gasped and sat bolt upright.
Stars, Oriana, you're right.
Why didn't I think of it? One of us could enthrall her and tell her to take us to the Bathsheba. She would know the ship's position because she's been there before.
I mean, it's a little cruel,
said Oriana. Not as cruel as what the Regians were doing to her, and once we arrived, we would set her free. I think you're forgetting something. The Bathsheba might still be infested with Regians.
Perhaps, but if we can just reach our supply of elixir and the soldiers can get to their weapons and armour, I'm sure we can take her back. The Regians are just insects with a unique ability and access to spacefaring animals. It was Lomang and Mezban's stupidity and greed that let us down.
Bryce smiled. And after we take her back, what then? Then we find out where we are and set a course for Earth. The end. This has been Accursed Space, Star Mage Saga Book 5, written and narrated by J.J. Green. The next book in the Star Mage Saga series is Flight from Sanctuary, Star Mage Saga Book 6. For more J.J. Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.